Sunny did not fully understand what the sorcerer meant by saying that the new heart needed time to settle. Physically, he felt fine. Great, even. Both of his hearts were beating steadily in his chest, powerful and dependable like relentless machines. However, he had not put them under any strain since the battle with Nightmare, so there was no way of telling how they would behave in a crisis. Remembering the frightening pain of having his heart give out, Sunny decided to take the immortal's word for it and allow himself to rest. He needed rest anyway. While his body had healed, the mind was not that resilient. Sunny felt that his mental state was not in the best of shapes. However, strangely, it was not as bad as he would have expected. After the hellish 2 months he had spent in the Red Colosseum with Elyas, their subsequent escape, and the young man's death, Sunny had been numb and apathetic for a long time. He had gone through the motions of pursuing a simple goal without much emotion, hiding in the darkness as he traveled across the kingdom of hope, too hurt and defeated to feel anything. Already in a damaged and vulnerable state, he had been then thrust into the harrowing succession of nightmares and forced to experience one hideous torment after another. At this point, Sunny could have broken. But instead, unexpectedly, he had found himself full of rapacious determination. That determination had banished the suffocating lethargy and allowed him to endure countless nightmares and continue to fight, until there were none left. It was as though the two ghastly experiences clashed and counteracted each other, leaving him in a semblance of a healthy state. Or maybe it was just the matter of suffering a bitter defeat by Solving's hand, but then refusing to give up and clawing his way to victory in the battle against Nightmare. That victory, costly as it had been, ignited his tortured spirit despite all the suffering it brought, the same way that the previous defeat had extinguished it. Well, healthy was a strong word. Perhaps functioning was more suitable. He could still feel barely closed wounds in his mind, which sometimes made their existence known. And added to that was the invisible, insidious poison of hope. Yes, a week or two of rest did not sound too bad. Sunny had a feeling that later, there would not be such an opportunity again. After their breakfast conversation, Noctis offered to host him in the luxurious residence. However, Sunny felt that sharing a living space with the eccentric sorcerer would have been very conducive to peaceful restoration, so he politely refused. In the end, he settled in spacious quarters on the opposite side of the Ring of Menhirs, close to where his small room had been in the future. His new one was larger and much better furnished. It was comfortable, beautiful, and safe. However, Sunny didn't like to stay inside the room for too long. Being surrounded by its stone walls reminded him of the dungeon of the Red Colosseum too much, so he spent most of his days in the inner garden of the sanctuary. The people living in the former Temple of the Moon did not seem as perturbed by seeing a horned demon walk among them as the humans of the waking world would have been, especially since they knew that Sunny had arrived with Noctis himself. However, they were still tense and apprehensive around him. In the end, Sunny found himself being avoided at all costs, which suited him fine, not wishing to disturb anyone unnecessarily. He tended to remain in a corner of the garden where very few people ever appeared. Coincidentally, it was the same place where he used to sell soul shards in the future. His favorite stone, sadly, was usually taken by the leper whose body and disfigured face were covered with dirty bandages. Oh well, life couldn't always be perfect. The first time Sunny sat down on the grass a few meters away from the leper, he spared the four-armed monster a short glance, lingered for a few moments, and then said in an ugly, grating, hoarse voice,
"And what kind of a creature are you?"
Sunny looked at the leper, not really wishing to engage in a conversation, then reluctantly produced the emerald amulet and answered that he was a demon, and asked what kind of a creature the leper was.
"The demon, what kind of a creature are you?"
The leper smiled, causing a bit of yellow pus to sip from beneath the bandages covering his face. Kai replied that he was a cripple. Sunny studied the man, then made a grimace and asked in a sullen tone whether he would catch whatever the leper had.
"I won't catch whatever it is that you have, will I?"
The leper let out a creaky chuckle. Kai answered that he was not diseased, just burned. Sunny tilted his head a little, then shrugged and turned away. So, the leper was not a leper. His body was just severely burned, and judging by the fact that the rags covering the bandages seemed to have been pristine white once, he had probably come to the sanctuary from the Ivory City. Sunny wasn't sure that he wanted to know how a citizen of the sun god's stronghold ended up with those burns. The memory of their lord's torture was still fresh in his mind. They haven't spoken after that, remaining in indifferent silence, looking at the empty corner of the beautiful garden around them and the distant figures of humans going about their lives. Sunny couldn't help but remember his first day at the academy. Back then, two outcasts, Cassie and himself, had been segregated from the rest of sleepers in a similar fashion, suddenly in a somber mood. He put the amulet away and thought that some things never change, don't they? Of course. He would have preferred to be in the company of a beautiful oracle instead of a hideous cripple. That was only fair, considering that the cripple would have without a doubt preferred company of someone like Cassie to that of a ferocious-looking demon as well. With a sigh, Sunny threw these thoughts out of his head and closed his eyes, trying to meditate. 2 weeks. That was all the time he had to prepare himself for the encroaching hell of an obliterating war. If you are enjoying the story so far, please like the episode and share it with a fellow reader who might love it too. Now let us return to the tale. For the next several days, Sunny did nothing but sleep, rest, and practice weaving. His 2 new wooden fingers were able to channel essence, which showed just how incredible Noctis was at his craft. However, they could not touch the ethereal strings. It seemed that only Sunny's own flesh and bone were capable of that. He was already accustomed to manipulating the shadow strings without those fingers, though, so the task had not grown much harder. There was also the long needle that shone with faint golden radiance to help him along. In those several days, Sunny made a bit of progress in his attempts to copy the simplest of enchantments. He also successfully destroyed several more memories, which really stung his newly repaired hearts. Sunny let out a bitter curse at the loss. Sunny stared at the rain of disappearing sparks that had been an enchanted buckler just a few moments ago and sighed. Another failure, another lost memory. He was going through his collection of them way too fast. At that point, he was starting to wonder if there was a better use for it. Saint's shadow fragment counter was still at 59,200, and now he had another shadow to feed. Nightmare also demanded his fair share of resources to reach the next rank, and his appetite was even steeper. Currently, the Dark Courser was at 1,300. And that single fragment came from a memory Sunny had fed him to check if the horse also consumed them. The only silver lining was that Nightmare was still of the awakened rank, and as such, gained more sustenance from weaker memories. Getting him to 300 was going to require about the same amount as what Saint needed to get to 2. That was another reason why Sunny wanted to master at least the very foundation of weaving. If he could create even the simplest memories himself, he would effectively gain the ability to convert soul shards into shadow fragments. As far as Saint and Nightmare were concerned, probably. He already knew enough to try actually, and only lacked a few shards to experiment. However, the ability to copy and modify enchantments seemed even more alluring. Just imagining the utility of such a skill made him tremble with excitement. But enough was enough. He could not endure the heartbreaking sorrow of losing another memory today. With each of them he destroyed, Sunny could practically see potential credits disappearing from his theoretical bank account. Shaking his head dejectedly, he returned the needle into the maw of the covetous coffer, dismissed the little box, and headed toward the door of his room. It was time for some fresh air. Finding his way to the familiar corner of the garden, Sunny noticed the motionless figure of the bandaged cripple and ignored him, then sat down on the grass some distance away. 2 of them were perfectly content pretending that the other didn't exist. After that first conversation, neither uttered a single word, which was a beautiful thing. Sunny muttered to himself that if only all humans were that reticent. The cripple never bothered him, and so Sunny liked him a lot. They had a perfect understanding. Closing his eyes, Sunny meditated for a while but then grew bored. He still had a few hours to kill before dinner, and there was nothing to do. Well, that was not a problem. Really, there always was a mountain of things he had wanted, but never found time to address. For example, he was very curious to study the spellweave of the Shadow Lantern. It was a divine memory after all. But just the thought of staring at the inhuman complexity of weaves again made his mood grow foul. So Sonny decided to return to that task sometime later. What else was there? Come to think of it, he had not practiced archery for a long time now. His skill in that regard was still very far from satisfactory. Sonny thought for a bit, then stood up and summoned Morgan's warbow. The beautiful black bow weaved itself from scarlet sparks, which were the same color as its grip and string, as well as the small brand in the shape of a straight sword piercing straight through an anvil that was burned into its surface. He turned slightly and glanced at the gray stone of one of the giant menhirs that loomed some distance away. Surely, the ancient stone pillar that had withstood 1,000 years in perfect condition, and was going to withstand thousands more, would not be damaged if he used it for target practice. Not that Sonny cared too much. Noctis would just have to produce a new menhir if he destroyed one, or several. The bastard owed him this much, at least. With a short sigh, he raised the bow, placed his fingers on the string, and strained his muscles to pull it back. Due to the unbending enchantment of the fearsome warbow, Sonny needed all of his might, as well as the help of the shadows, just to draw the string. No mundane human would have ever been able to do that, and even among the awakened, only those with aspects providing exceptional physical enhancement could hope to succeed. But thanks to that, every arrow sent flying by the black bow went especially far and hit with devastating strength. And speaking of arrows, as Sonny was drawing the string, a shadow appeared on it, then grew heavy and solid, turning from a ghostly shade into a sharp arrow. The other enchantment of Morgan's warbow, soul arrows, allowed it to attune to the soul of the wielder and create arrows that shared its affinity. The arrow Sonny just created was utterly black with dark fletching and a narrow head that seemed to be made out of a sharp piece of obsidian. This was a shadow arrow, which flew swiftly and didn't produce any sound at all. It was also perfect for finding cracks in the enemy's armor. Actually, he could create a different kind of arrow, too, due to his high divine affinity. Those arrows were lustrous and seemed to be forged out of pale gold, their broadheads perfect for slicing flesh and causing terrible wounds. There was probably another quality to them, but Sonny had yet to figure it out. In any case, that didn't matter right now. Bringing the string to his ear with some effort, Sonny struggled to hold it in place. Then closed one eye, took aim, and jerked his fingers away from the arrow. The string hit the inner side of Sonny's forearm, and the black arrow shot forward with incredible speed. Attracted by the sound, the cripple turned his head and stared at Sonny from beneath his dirty bandages. A moment later, the arrow hit the giant menhir, completely off the mark. He had aimed at a tiny crack on the surface of the ancient stone, but had not managed to strike anywhere near it. Looking down at his forearm, which now had a deep cut, Sonny clicked his tongue and let out a dissatisfied growl. Then he wrapped his arm with a piece of cloth, summoned a second arrow, and repeated the process, this time almost managing to miss the menhir completely. Sonny cursed in frustration. It seemed that his accuracy had only reduced in the past months. How had he even managed to grow worse? Kai observed that he was doing it all wrong. Sonny remained motionless for a few moments, then turned around and stared at the cripple without any amusement in his frightening black eyes. Perhaps he was hasty to commend the man for his quiet and reticent nature. Who wanted to hear that hideously grating voice, anyway? Producing the emerald amulet, Sonny thought with some irritation whether the cripple was an archery expert now.
Oh yes, what, you are an archery expert now?
The cripple remained silent for a while, then turned away. Kai said that he used to be a captain in the Sun Legion before. He sighed, and then smiled a little. Kai added that he had led 100 brave warriors into battle for the glory of Lord Severax in the Ivory City. The cripple grew silent, and then added quietly. Kai said simply before. Sonny stared at the bandages that covered the man's burned body, then glanced at his soul, which was illuminated by a radiant core of an awakened. So this guy used to be an officer serving one of the Sun Immortals. He hesitated for a moment, then asked how Kai had ended up so messed up, where the burned scars came from, and whether the warmongers had caught him.
How'd you end up this messed up then? Where do all these burn scars come from? Did the warmongers catch you?
The cripple stared into the distance for some time, then slowly shook his head. Kai replied that Sonny had plenty of scars himself, some as terrible as his, and asked about the wicked one around his neck and where it came from. Sonny looked down at the crestfallen man, then grinned.
What that thing? Funny you should ask. You see, I did actually got captured by the warmongers once. So, to escape, I tricked the biggest and meanest of them into cutting my head off. Then I killed him, picked it up, and put it back on. True story.
He grew silent for a while, and then added nonchalantly.
Oh, and I killed Solving too. You know who that is, right?
The cripple stared at him with wide eyes, shock, awe, and confusion mixing in them in equal measure. Sonny just wanted to mock the guy a little, but the poor fool seemed to have actually believed him. What an idiot. Actually, something about the cripple's eyes seemed strangely familiar, at least in that moment. Sonny suddenly froze and stared at the bandages hiding the man's disfigured face, his mouth turning dry. A few moments passed in a strange silence, and then both of them spoke at the same time, Sonny breathing the name Kai and Kai blurting out Sonny's name in equal disbelief. The towering demon and the hideous cripple stared at each other for a bit, their eyes wide with shock.
Now way, he was here all along. Wait, who dared to do this to Kai? When I find the bastard, I'll tear them limb from limb.
Sonny was so stunned that he even failed to let go of the emerald amulet. He gritted his fangs, then asked a question at the same time as Kai did, Sonny demanding who had done this to him, while Kai blurted out asking why Sonny was so tall. Flustered, the two fell silent for a moment. Then, Sonny reached out and grabbed the cripple into a crushing hug, wrapping all of his forearms around him. Who knew? Who knew that this repulsive body, which was covered in dirty bandages that smelled of blood and pus, would suddenly become so precious and dear to him?
I was put into a body of a demon. Why wouldn't I be tall, you idiot?
Kai let out a startled yelp, struggled weakly, and then patted Sonny on one of the arms. Kai groaned that he was very glad to see Sonny as well, but his burns were hurting. Sonny jolted, then hurriedly let go of the cripple's body and gave him an apologetic look. Beneath that simple emotion, though, a dark ocean of fury smoldered with dangerous flames.
Sorry, I didn't. Kai, you're alive. Damn, I am so happy to see you. I was starting to wonder if any of you guys have made it alive.
Kai looked at him, then smiled. Through the gaps in the bandages, his disfigured face looked ghastly and hideous, but the sparks glinting in his eyes were the same. He sighed. Kai said that he had been fearing the same. The young man hesitated and then added, his voice suddenly ringing hollow.
After the Iron Hand Island, I almost gave up hope. I didn't think that I'll see any of you ever again.
Sonny frowned, confused by Kai's words. He dismissed his bow and then thought tensely, asking what was on the Iron Hand Island.
Why, what is on the Iron Hand Island?
The cripple looked at him with surprise. Kai asked whether Sonny hadn't been there. Sonny shook his head.
No, I was going to travel there in a week after my new heart settles. I made a deal with a sorcerer, you see, to replace a heart I lost.
Kai stared at him for a bit, then looked down and let out a heavy sigh. Kai said that he saw and that there was not much to tell. He remained silent for a few moments, and then said quietly, his hoarse voice growing even more creaky and grating.
There was no sign that you or Cassie had ever managed to reach the rendezvous point, even though months had already passed. But Effie left a message there, carved into a stone pillar.
Sonny exclaimed that Effie was alive too. Sonny clenched his fists, excited. Of course she was alive. That glutton would never die and leave all the food in two worlds uneaten. Encouraged, he eagerly asked what Effie's message had said. Kai looked away as though reluctant to answer. After a while, he finally opened his mouth and said quietly,
It was just one sentence.
The young man glanced at Sonny. then added in a somber tone. As it turned out, Kai had reached the sanctuary 2 weeks before Sunny. Although he did not go into detail, the archer explained that he had been sent into the body of an officer in the army of the Ivory City and got entangled in the conflict between the Sun People and the Warmongers for the first months of the nightmare. Eventually, he managed to escape and made his way east. The journey was slow and torturous because of how terribly mangled his body was. But he somehow made it to the Iron Hand Island alive, if just barely. There, his hope of reuniting with his friends was cruelly crushed by the fact that neither Sunny nor Cassie seemed to have made it, while Effie had only left an ominous message imploring them to not try to find her. Consumed by terrible pain and despair, Kai left his own message on the island and continued to the sanctuary, where, as he had heard, stragglers like him could find refuge and shelter. He remained there since, trying to recover as much strength as he could and hoping against all logic that the others were going to read the message he had left and come to the sanctuary too. And then, through a strange twist of fate, Sunny arrived despite not even visiting the Iron Hand Island. Kai shook his head and said, his voice full of amusement,
How did you even end up here, arriving on that flying ship, no less? Sunny, do you know who its captain is?
Sunny nodded.
Who else? It's Noctis. That guy goes around insisting that he is now my best friend. You see, the spell sent me into the Warmongers' territory where I was captured and forced to participate in their wicked trials. I barely escaped with my life and stumbled upon him while fleeing to the southern island. He needed a favor from a shadow creature, and I needed passage to the eastern parts of the Chained Isles, so that's how I arrived here on that ship.
He grew silent for a bit and scowled, thinking feverishly. Do not come to the Temple of the Chalice. That was what Effie had written on a stone pillar. However, Sunny had heard of the place before in the nightmare of the Shadow Lord. Give the glass knife to the War Maiden in the Temple of the Chalice. That was what the immortal Shadow had told the original owner of the four-armed demon's body. And that was the secret Noctis wanted to learn from Sunny, while Sunny wanted to find his friends. So many coincidences. Kai cleared his throat.
You know who he is, right? Lord Noctis is the master of this place, as well as one of the 5 transcendent immortals. Throughout the Kingdom of Hope, he is feared and revered in equal measure, and his name is synonymous with mystery and power, as well as debauchery, mischief, and disaster, a being like him. Although Lord Noctis is rumored to possess a merciful heart, he is still dangerous and terrifying. Sunny, are you sure that you should be getting entangled with such a being?
Sunny glanced at Kai and remained silent for a while, then said in a grim tone,
There is not much choice. He is the axis of this nightmare, dangerous, terrifying. Noctis is all that and also so much more. However, all of that is not very important right now.
He sighed, and then turned toward the residence of the frightening immortal with a dark expression on his face.
What's important right now is that he can help us find Effie.
Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then looked at Kai and said with determination. Kai nodded and followed the four-armed demon, pushing forward his bandaged body with visible effort. Seeing his friends suffering, Sunny gritted his teeth. The archer, meanwhile, glanced at him with a grim expression, and then said in his new, unfamiliar and ugly voice,
Sunny, I have one question. Can you answer it?
Sunny slowed down and turned to him, a deep scowl contorting the bestial lines of his face. Kai remained silent for a bit, then asked cautiously. Sunny blinked a couple of times, then tilted his head a little.
Oh right, where else? We are going to talk to Noctis.
With that, he turned around and continued walking toward the immortal sorcerer's residence. The archer hurried to catch up, then said in a stifled tone,
Ah, is that Noctis, the immortal transcendent, blessed of the moon, crimson beast of twilight, chain lord of the Kingdom of Hope, and all that.
Sunny glanced at him, then shrugged.
Yes, that Noctis, don't worry though. He is indeed terrifying but not unreasonable.
Together, they crossed the garden of the sanctuary and approached the beautifully engraved wooden door. A pair of sailor dolls were standing guard outside, their indifferent faces staring at them with hollow stillness. Noticing Sunny, one of them moved aside and knocked on the door, which then opened all by itself. The two of them entered and froze, unsure how to react. Sunny muttered under his breath about what the hell he was seeing. Noctis was levitating above the floor. His legs crossed and his eyes closed. He might have seemed like a wise sage in the middle of a deep meditation, if not for dozens of empty amphoras of wine that floated all around him. The terrifying chain lord, blessed of the moon, the crimson beast of twilight, was dead drunk. Hearing someone enter, Noctis lazily opened one eye and stared at Sunny, then at Kai. Finally, he landed on the floor and yawned, causing all the amphoras to fall down and shatter, sending drops of wine flying everywhere and staining the luscious carpets.
Ah, Sunless, what a nice surprise to see you so soon, and you brought someone with you. What a hideous creature. Wait, did I say that out loud? No, surely not. I am too wise and courteous to make a rude remark like that. Of course, nice to meet you, whoever you are. Welcome. To my quarters.
He gave them a radiant smile, then waved a hand, causing the whole residence to shudder and the shards of the amphoras to disappear without a trace. Then, Noctis walked over to a small table, picked up a fresh apple, and glanced at his guests with a curious expression.
To what do you owe the honor?
To what do we owe? Wait, wasn't it supposed to be the other way around?
Sunny frowned, then glanced at Kai, who was staring at the immortal sorcerer with an inexorable expression on his burned, disfigured face. Finally, he cleared his throat and turned to Noctis.
Actually, I am here to deliver some good news. Do you remember the friends I told you about? Well, this is one of them. And yes, you did say it out loud.
The sorcerer stared at Kai, blinked a couple of times, then took a bite out of the apple.
Oh, so this is one of the friends that you were supposed to find after visiting an island that doesn't exist, despite not knowing how they look, where they are, and what they are called. He just happened to be here in my sanctuary. How fortunate.
Sunny smiled.
Indeed, this is Nightingale, my dear friend, a man with a voice of an angel and a face to go along with it.
Kai spared him a sidelong glance, then bowed slightly and forced out a grating, creaky greeting.
It is nice to meet you, Lord Noctis.
The sorcerer shuddered and looked right and left, then shook his head.
God's Sunless, do not ever mention those creatures again, even in jest. Angels are not something to be called upon, whether by name or in passing.
Then he briefly touched the symbol of the moon on his forehead and sighed.
Anyway, I am glad that you have found one of your friends. Have the two of you discussed my proposal?
Sunny hesitated for a bit, then answered somberly.
No, we have not. We still need to find 2 more friends for that, however.
He sighed, knowing that the luxury of having a choice was looking more and more distant by the day. But he needed the sorcerer's help and his knowledge to find and retrieve Effie from the mysterious temple of the Chalice. In that particular matter, he was willing to compromise. Even if he gave up the secret of the glass knife, he would still be in possession of the obsidian one. Sunny crossed 2 of his 4 arms and said,
I am willing to share the location of the Shadow Lord's knife with you in exchange for some assistance.
Noctis stared at him for some time, then suddenly grinned.
Really, what assistance do you require? I am the most helpful person in the Kingdom of Hope, you know.
Sunny raised 2 fingers.
First, you will help treat my friend's wounds. Second, you will help us rescue another of our other friends from the place she is being held in.
He thought for a bit, and then raised a 3rd finger.
Oh, and also coins. You will give me lots of Noctis coins.
The sorcerer ate his apple in silence for a bit, then laughed.
Well, I think I can do 2 out of those 3 things at least. No problem, so tell me, where is your other friend being held?
Sunny lingered for a few moments, still hesitant to make the bargain. Finally, he sighed and said, Noctis suddenly choked on the apple, coughed violently a few times, then grabbed a glass of wine and nervously emptied it. Then, with a flushed face, he glanced at Sunny and forced out a strange smile.
One, I think I can do one out of those 3 things at least.
Sunny scowled, surprised by that reaction. He glanced at Kai, then motioned for him to sit down. From the looks of it, this conversation was going to be a long one. The archer cautiously lowered himself onto a nearby chair and let out a quiet groan of pain, then looked around, a hint of curiosity appearing in his cloudy eyes. His gaze lingered on various pieces of furniture and exquisite decorations, then finally settled on the flustered sorcerer. Noctis seemed to have regained his composure somewhat. He stared at his half-eaten apple with a somber expression, then threw it away and sat down himself. A heavy sigh escaped from his lips.
The 3 things you asked for are not that easy to accomplish.
The immortal glanced at Kai, then raised one elegant finger.
I can help your friend Nightingale recover from his wounds, somewhat. Those burns were not delivered by mundane flames, and so even I would not be able to restore that which was destroyed completely. With my help, he will be able to regain most of his strength and vitality. I can also repair the damage done to his soul, but the flames, their mark will remain, unless you want me to build him a completely new vessel, of course.
Noctis smiled, and then glanced at one of the wooden mannequins, which was in the process of disposing of the carelessly discarded apple.
Something like that, but much better.
Kai shivered.
Will I be able to draw a bow and control soul essence after you treat my body?
The sorcerer nodded.
Of course, you might even grow stronger than you were before, but your face... I am sorry to say this, Nightingale, but it will remain as hideous as it is now. The pain that consumes you will subside but never go away completely. If you agree to transfer your soul into a doll, on the other hand, your strength will diminish slightly. But you won't have to endure that suffering anymore. I can also promise to make a truly beautiful vessel for you. One worthy of carrying even the most radiant of souls.
The archer remained silent for a while, then smiled.
No need. This face suits me fine. As long as I can draw a bow and help my friends, I will be content.
Noctis looked at him silently, an expression of confusion written clearly on his face.
But don't you want to become beautiful?
Kai chuckled, his voice hoarse and grating. Then he shook his head and said simply. Both Noctis and Sunny stared at the archer with dubious expressions, thinking that he had lost his mind. Well, more than anyone else in the Kingdom of Hope had already lost theirs. His disfigured face was ugly, grotesque, and unsightly. What was he even trying to say? However, it did not seem that Kai felt compelled to expand on that strange statement. He just remained silent, calmly looking at the sorcerer. After a few moments, Noctis turned away and shrugged.
Well, as you wish. The treatment will be long and painful, but it can be done.
Then he raised a second finger and glanced at Sunny.
The other thing you asked for, lots of my coins, was it? To be honest, how do I say this? No.
Sunny blinked, surprised. The sorcerer yawned, then made a helpless gesture with his hands.
What can I say? Making those coins takes time. Do you know how long it took me to create a few thousand before? Each coin contains a piece of a corrupted soul, after all. That is the reason why they are so valuable, precious, and coveted by everyone in the Kingdom of Hope.
He thought for a few moments and added absent-mindedly.
Oh, now that you reminded me, only most of the souls were corrupted. I think there were a few humans I fed to the mimic as well. Regardless, all those coins were consumed when that poor fool claimed the obsidian knife from the altar, so if you really want me to make new ones, I guess I can quickly kill everyone here in the sanctuary and cook up 100 or 2.
Sunny shivered, then hurriedly raised his hands.
No need. Let's not kill anyone yet.
Noctis smiled.
Are you sure? Well, all right, so then.
He raised the third finger.
Lastly, the Temple of the Chalice. I am sorry to say this, but there is absolutely no chance of me ever going anywhere near that place again. Not that I could, even if I wanted to. And I don't. Ever.
Sonny stared at the sorcerer with a deep scowl, then gritted his teeth.
Wine, what is so terrible about that place?
Noctis shivered, then sighed and nervously sipped his wine.
Oh, it's not that it's terrible, it's just that men aren't allowed to enter the temple unless they are serving a woman. They put that rule in place. After the last time I visited.
Sonny really tried to not let his face change and simply glared at Noctis, his eye twitching. Uncomfortable under that murderous gaze, the sorcerer shrunk and looked away. A low growl escaped from Sonny's mouth.
Who cares? You are one of the chain lords. What can they do if you decide to break that rule?
Noctis chuckled nervously.
You don't get it, chain lord or not. You see, sunless, as I said, my lands became somewhat of a refuge for those who seek it. And one of the groups of refugees I sheltered was the remains of an ancient and rather terrifying sect. This sect takes in orphan girls, especially those born with red hair, and trains them to become perfect vessels of war. His deadly tools, priestesses and heralds. The war maidens are not someone to be trifled with.
He grew silent for a moment, and then added,
In fact, they only needed my protection because there was a schism within the sect, and one of their disciples left to create her own cult. However, since no one can really leave that sect alive, her departure was not amicable. Those who survived it came here to build the Temple of the Chalice and remained there since. Oh, and that runaway disciple of theirs, I think you have already met her.
Sonny grew cold and leaned back, feeling both of his hearts skip a couple of beats. Then he closed his eyes for a few moments, and finally said in a hoarse voice,
Do you mean to tell me that the sect that dwells in the Temple of the Chalice is where solving comes from?
Noctis nodded and gave him a ghostly smile.
Exactly, that is where that fiend was raised, and there is a bunch of little monsters just like her being trained there as we speak. I mean, no one can really compare to solving, but they are not too far off, so you can understand why I am reluctant to break my word and make enemies of the war maidens. Right.
Sonny remained silent for a while, and then sighed heavily. Holding the emerald amulet in one of his calloused hands, he thought,
Well, tough luck, because that is exactly where the glass knife is.
Despite his grim mood, Sonny felt a bit of vindictive satisfaction when he saw the sorcerer's handsome face pale, and the glass of wine slip from his hand. A tense silence settled in the opulent residence of the mad sorcerer, who, meanwhile, was staring at Sonny with an indescribable expression on his pale, beautiful face. Noctis didn't seem happy at all despite finally learning the secret that he had been searching for all this time. In that silence, Kai's hoarse voice suddenly resounded, full of polite curiosity.
I am very sorry, but that glass knife you're talking about, why exactly do we need it?
Both Sonny and Noctis turned to him. After an awkward pause, the immortal scratched the back of his head and answered,
That thing you see is the only thing that can kill Severs, the Blessed of the Sun, and I really, really want to kill him.
Noticing a slight confusion on the archer's face, he thought for a moment and then added,
Right, these days people call him Severax, the Ivory Lord. You have heard of him, yes.
Kai lingered for a bit, then looked down at his bandaged hands and said evenly,
Well, yes, you might say that I have.
He closed his eyes for a moment and then smiled.
In that case, we must retrieve the glass knife, and our friend, Lord Noctis. Surely there is something that we can do. You know a lot about that sect of theirs. Is there a way for you to enter the Temple of the Chalice, find both the knife and our friend, and bring them back to the sanctuary?
Noctis stared at him for a while, then shook his head.
No, there is no way for me to invade the temple. At least not without destroying it completely, which would doom that friend of yours along with the rest of the sect. Sadly, that is also one of the places I can't infiltrate in disguise. Infiltrate it again, I mean.
Sunny and Kai glanced at each other, and then the archer cautiously asked,
If that is the case, what if we infiltrate it instead?
The sorcerer stared at them with surprise, and then laughed.
Sunless and Nightingale, what a strange pair you are. Do you not know fear? I have just told you how frightening the war maidens are.
Sunny smiled, showing his sharp fangs, and then shrugged. Kai shook his head and answered for both of them, saving him from having to do so.
Oh, on the contrary, both of us are actually very cowardly. But Lord Noctis, you might not know this, but Sunless and I, we can be a bit frightening ourselves.
The immortal transcendent gave them a dubious look, and then shook his head.
Somehow I believe it, but no, it doesn't matter. Even if you are willing, you can't get into the Temple of the Chalice. Only women are allowed inside, and not any women at that. They will only give passage to female warriors of utmost skill, those who are veiled in dread and the smell of numerous bloody battlefields, maybe with a couple of lowly servants at best. You're both men, so it is useless to even try.
Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then sighed deeply and said,
Actually, that won't be a problem.
Noctis blinked a couple of times and looked at him with confused amusement. The sorcerer gave him a strange look, and then asked with a mischievous smile,
Is there something I don't know about you?
Sunny glanced at him darkly, scowled, and answered in a sharp tone,
There's plenty, but that was not what I meant. I just have a female warrior of dreadful skill at hand.
With that, he summoned Saint. 2 ruby flames ignited in the depths of his shadow, and then the taciturn demon stepped out of it, wreathed in darkness. Her graceful figure appeared in the middle of the sorcerer's residence, and then the shadow turned her head slightly, staring at the master of the place with cold indifference. Noctis looked back at her, his eyes widening. His lips trembled. The sorcerer leaned forward, his expression frozen, and then suddenly clenched his fists with excitement.
That armor, the design, the fit, oh gods, who forged that masterpiece? Sunless, please tell me.
Saint tilted her head a little, while Sunny and Kai stared at the immortal transcendent with inexorable expressions. After a few moments of dead silence, Sunny cleared his throat.
Actually, I am not sure. Prince of the Underworld, I think. Wait, haven't you seen me wearing a similar armor?
Noctis glanced at him with confusion, then waved a hand dismissively.
If I did, you must have not done it justice. This beauty, however, so it was Hope's little brother, who knew he had such impeccable taste.
Finally, the sorcerer became aware of his surroundings and moved his gaze up, staring right into Saint's ruby eyes. His smile widened, but then grew rather strange. He glanced at Sunny with confusion.
Sunless, this is one of your shadows, yes. How come she is more powerful than you? Oh, did you inherit this sublime creature from the Shadow Lord? That rogue. He had been hiding such a treasure from me all that time.
Sunny did not like the way Noctis was looking at Saint one bit. In fact, he suddenly felt a very strong impulse to wipe the lecherous smile off the immortal's face, which would not have been very wise, considering who that immortal actually was. He gritted his teeth.
No, if you must know, I've created her myself, and also she can hear you. Have some manners, will you?
Noctis froze, then flinched and suddenly turned very courteous. He glanced at Saint, then walked around her, studying the taciturn demon with a very serious expression. The shadow didn't move, seemingly uncaring of his presence. Finally, the sorcerer returned to his previous spot and smiled.
That shadow of yours might indeed be allowed into the Temple of the Chalice. She has a presence about her. Even I am impressed. The 2 of you will pose as her servants, I assume.
Sunny and Kai looked at each other, then nodded. The sorcerer turned away, thinking, then said thoughtfully,
That might actually work. Once you are inside, you can find your friend and locate the glass knife. That will be extremely dangerous, but not impossible. If you succeed, I can ensure your safe escape. However,
Noctis glanced at them, his expression growing somber.
Sunless Nightingale, if things go wrong inside the Temple of the Chalice, even I won't be able to save you. You will be on your own, so ask yourself seriously whether or not rescuing your friend is worth risking your lives over. You can make new friends, you know, but you can only die once.
Kai looked at the immortal sorcerer and smiled. Sunny wasn't so quick to speak. After a while, he snorted and looked away.
I don't make friends easily, so the ones I do have are extremely valuable. One has to protect their valuables, you know. That's just basic logic.
He glanced at Noctis with a dark expression and added,
Besides, who says that you can only die once? I have already died 100 times, and that was just after meeting you. Killing me is really a very troublesome endeavor.
After their conversation with Noctis was done, Sunny and Kai left the sorcerer alone. The immortal needed some time to make preparations, so they had a few hours left before the archer's treatment was going to begin. After that, they were not going to see each other again until it was over, which would take at least a week. Walking through the beautiful garden of the sanctuary, Kai remained silent for a bit, and then said with a smile. Sunny glanced at him with a dark expression. The archer shrugged, then frowned a little. The bandages covering his disfigured face moved, revealing a confused expression. Sunny shook his head.
No, we have been swindled actually. Think about it. I wanted to get 3 things out of Noctis in exchange for revealing the location of the glass knife to him. Heal you, rescue Effie, and receive his enchanted coins. Not only did he force the secret out of me without even lifting a finger, he even fooled us into retrieving the knife in his stead, while thinking that it was our own idea, no less.
He grimaced, then let out a heavy sigh.
Scary, he is a cunning trickster, and my own mind seems to be dulled by the curse of hope. Still, all is well. Noctis will heal your body, nothing else matters.
Kai frowned when Sunny mentioned Hope's influence, but didn't ask anything, revealing that he had made the discovery himself. After a while, he said,
When you put it like that, I do feel a bit foolish. But Sunny, if you knew that we are being swindled, why didn't you try to drive a harder bargain?
Sunny shrugged.
There was no point to. I did not expect him to honor all 3 of my requests anyway. 2 of them were just for show. While those coins of his are useful, I can do without them. As for rescuing Effie, that is our own task. I would not have entrusted it to an outsider, especially an ancient transcendent with mysterious motives.
He remained silent for a few moments, and then added,
We will have to ally ourselves with at least one of the chain lords in order to conquer this nightmare, but becoming dependent on someone else's strength is a slippery slope. In the end, we can only put trust in our own efforts.
Kai tilted his head a little.
So, those 2 requests were just bait, and your real intention had only been to get Noctis to heal me.
Lost in thought, Sunny simply nodded. The archer smiled, then mumbled under his nose. They reached their corner of the garden in silence and sat down on the grass. There was so much Sunny wanted to tell Kai and so much he wanted to ask. He was sure that Kai felt the same, but without even having to say anything, both of them decided to remain silent. They had already shared some things about their experiences in the nightmare, and as for details, that was going to have to wait until the cohort was back together, even knowing that it was foolish. They both held on to the feeling that by postponing this conversation, they were somehow increasing the chances of the other 2 members joining them unharmed. After a while, Kai asked,
Do you think that she is all right, Effie? From what Noctis said, that sect is incredibly ancient, formidable, and cruel. If Effie was sent into the body of a disciple with her temper, I hate to admit it, but I am afraid for her. Plus, none of the maidens is allowed to leave that temple alive. How are we going to take her away?
Sunny remained silent for a few moments, then shook his head.
Effie is more resilient than any of us. Don't forget, she survived in the Dark City far longer than you or I, completely alone. She held the line during the siege of the Spire and survived that too. Effie will be fine. The War Maidens are not as formidable as you might think either. After all, the Temple of the Chalice is destroyed in the future and all of them are dead. I've seen the bones myself.
His face grew somber when he remembered the furious wraiths whom he had slain to create his third core. Who could have known that the ruin he had already explored and the temple of the Chalice were one and the same? Judging by the destruction that reigned over the ancient temple in the future, someone was going to obliterate the fearsome sect between then and now. The War Maidens weren't invincible. Kai sighed.
What about Cassie? There is no sign of her. She is not like the rest of us. Her combat skill is commendable, but her aspect is not tailored toward direct confrontation, and with how terrible her flaw is.
He grew silent, reluctant to finish the thought. Sunny grinned.
Cassie, she is the last person you should be worried about. Believe me, she is doing fine, probably better than any of us.
At least, that was what Sunny wanted to believe. His flaw did not prevent him from saying those words aloud, so he must have been convinced that the statement was true to some degree at least. However, that didn't stop his hearts from growing cold and heavy. He sighed, and then added in a grim tone.
Who you should really be worried about is our fifth friend.
Kai frowned and looked at him with a dark expression.
It has to be that person, right? The Prince of Valor.
Sunny hesitated, then nodded.
That is what I believe as well.
The archer gritted his teeth and turned away.
It doesn't matter. Here in the nightmare, all of us are allies, are we not?
Sunny looked down, his black eyes growing even darker. After a while, he said,
We are meant to be, however, that doesn't mean that we have to be.
He sighed, and then looked at the people going about their lives in the distance.
Mordred is unpredictable and dangerous. I don't know what his goals are, but in this nightmare, his power would have grown considerably. Don't forget that he was the one who discovered this seed in the first place, and that wasn't by accident. He was searching for it on purpose. He is after something.
Sunny grew silent for a few moments, and then added, his voice turning grim.
Plus, there was already something wrong with Mordred in the waking world. Who knows what effect hope had on him if he had truly gone insane?
He shuddered.
Then the immortal saints might end up not being our biggest problem.
With that, Sunny stood up and summoned the vambrace of the puppeteer's shroud, then glanced at Kai with a strange glint in his eyes.
Anyway, since we have a few hours left before Noctis straps you to a table and does spell knows what to your body, how about you show me how to properly use a bow, while you still can, while there's a chance, I mean.
The sun was slowly drowning in the darkness of the void, and as it did, a veil of shadows was devouring the world. The western horizon was still aflame with the scarlet pyre of the sunset, but the somber night was already approaching from the east. On a desolate island covered by tall pillars of jagged rock, a numinous temple stood, its beautiful stone walls painted red by the light of the drowning sun. All around it, countless swords were thrust into the petrous ground. Rising from it like a solemn graveyard of steel, there was only one path through the forest of blades, and as the twilight of dusk approached it, a dull, echoing ringing suddenly resounded from the darkness, then traveled through it, slowly growing closer and closer. It was the sound of adamantine hooves ringing against stone. Soon, 4 crimson flames ignited in the shadows, and then revealed themselves to be 4 eyes. 2 belonged to a Stygian destrier, the other 2 to its dark rider. The steed was black as night, with dreadful horns crowning its head. It walked forward with a steady pace, fearsome and noble lean muscles rolling under its lusterless coat. The rider was a graceful woman in intricate onyx armor, her face hidden behind the visor of a closed helmet, with only ruby lights shining through it with indifferent resolve. Her presence was both calm and fearsome, full of quiet confidence and frightening strength. The blade of a great odachi rested on her shoulder, its steel as dark as the heart of the night. 2 steps behind the taciturn knight, 2 creatures walked with their gazes lowered to the ground. One was a towering, 4-armed demon dressed in a black kimono, his dark hair tied with a silk ribbon. The other was a strange human with skin that resembled polished bark, wearing a fitting dark garment made of soft silk. his disfigured face hidden behind a wooden mask and drowning in the shadow of a deep hood. Neither of them was armed. The Dark Knight led her horse to the first steps of the path through the graveyard of swords and stopped, waiting. Her ruby eyes burned with cold calmness, as though the woman had a heart made of stone, incapable of feeling fear, unease, or trepidation. Her servants, however, were not as aloof. Both stole glances at the magnificent stone temple, tension clearly written on their faces. A few moments later, the human asked quietly whether it was too late to turn back.
It is too late to turn back, isn't it?
The demon did not respond. Not that he was capable of speaking in the human tongue. Instead, he simply nodded, then froze as though sensing something. The other servant sighed and grew silent as well. There was no one and nothing around them, just the pillars of jagged rocks and the swords thrust into the ground. The island was awash in the blood-red radiance of the dying sunset, with deep shadows nesting in the spots from where the sunlight had already fled. A gust of wind suddenly blew, bringing with it the smell of iron. And then, out of nowhere, they were surrounded by a dozen silent figures. All of them were beautiful women wearing light garments made of red silk. Their bodies were slender and supple, their skin smooth and soft. The sight of them might have been alluring if not for the sharp coldness of their eyes, the ruthless expressions written on their tantalizing faces, and the murderous glint of their blades, all aimed at the uninvited guests. Sonny shivered. Sonny cursed under his breath in frustration. Noctis had not been joking when he described the war maidens as fearsome. Even though these women were just awakened, his intuition was screaming that they represented mortal danger. However, Sonny did not need the help of his enhanced sixth sense to understand that. The feeling he got from the female warriors was the same as he had experienced a few times before in his life, when facing true battle masters. Morgan of Valor had given him the same frightening sensation, as well as Oro of the 9 Master Jet Nephis, and a couple of others, all of them elite combatants of the highest tier. Some of these fiends he had fought and somehow survived, but not without shedding a lot of blood and receiving deep scars, if not on his body, then on his soul. And right now, he was staring at 12 of such monsters, and these were just the sentinels, no doubt. Who knew what kind of battle saints would he meet inside the temple? No wonder this sect had been Solving's cradle. Full of bad premonitions, he made sure to not make any sudden movements and continued staring at the ground. His role during this part was rather simple. He just had to do nothing. Her master might have been apprehensive, but Saint didn't seem concerned at all. She turned her head slightly and looked down at the war maidens, her gaze as calm and indifferent as always, noticing her calmness. A few of the female warriors gripped their weapons tighter. One of them, a tall woman with red hair and eyes the color of steel, frowned a little, and then asked in a raspy voice. Saint, of course, remained silent. Instead, Kai took a step forward and bowed, then spoke, his ugly voice sounding like grating scritching of rusty metal, explaining that his lady's voice was not for the war maiden to hear, and that his lady only spoke to those who had bested her in combat, and thus had not spoken ever since taking this solemn vow. The war maiden looked at him with distaste and interrupted. Kai remained bowed for a few moments, then straightened and looked at the woman from beneath his hood.
My lady's voice is not for you to hear. She only speaks to those who bested her in combat, and thus she has not spoken ever since taking this solemn vow.
The war maiden remained silent for a few moments, studying Saint's graceful and fearsome figure. Then she smiled darkly and remarked that the lady must not have fought anyone worth fighting then, and asked whether he was her servant. She must not have fought anyone worth fighting then. You are her servant. Kai nodded.
Indeed, I am her voice, and that creature over there is her shadow. We serve the lady.
The woman lingered for a moment, then glanced at him and raised an eyebrow, asking what a human like him was doing in the company of 2 shadows. What is a human like you doing in the company of 2 shadows? The archer remained silent for a few seconds, and then responded.
It's a long time ago, evil people captured me and locked me in a deep, dark well. I was going to die in there of thirst and hunger, but my lady lifted the heavy grate and helped me escape, while that demon slaughtered the evildoers. I owe them a debt of gratitude that can never be repaid."
The war maiden stared at him silently, then nodded and acknowledged that he spoke with sincerity, surprising for a man, and asked what his lady had come to their temple for. "You speak with sincerity, surprising for a man. Tell me then, why has your lady come to our temple?" Kai glanced at Saint and hesitated for a bit. Sonny felt his heart start to beat faster as well. This was the most dangerous part of their plan. In fact, he was still not entirely sure that it was going to be a wise move. However, both of them had decided that while not very wise, this was something that would give them the best chance to succeed. Full of tense anticipation, he silently gritted his teeth. Finally, the archer looked at the war maiden and said, his voice calm and steady,
"She has come to take back that which belongs to the shadows, to retrieve the death of the ivory lord from your hands, whether you are willing to return it or not."
The glass knife contained the string of fate that belonged to Severax, the chain lord of the Ivory City. It was his death, which the war maidens had received from the Saint of Shadows hundreds of years ago. Now, 2 shadows came back to retrieve it. Sonny suspected that none of the sect members that had been alive all those centuries ago lived still, including the particular maiden to whom Shadow Lord had sent the glass knife before taking his own life. As such, none would remember the 4-armed demon who had delivered it, most likely. And yet, the current disciples of the cult had to know what was being kept in their temple and how it got there. So, there was a chance that they will just hand it over to the original owners, no matter how slim. If not, they would allow Saint and her entourage inside, at least. That was Sonny's hope, and judging by the fact that the maidens did not immediately attack after hearing Kai's provocative statement. His calculations were not wrong. The tall woman who had spoken to them grew still as soon as the glass knife was mentioned, a somber expression appearing on her face. She studied Saint's motionless figure, then said coldly, her raspy voice growing slightly hoarse,
"So the day has come. How fortunate we are to witness it. Someone finally dares to challenge the Red Sect for the ownership of the ancient relic. Who knew that I would witness this children's story come true?"
She smiled darkly, then tilted her head, no humor in her sharp gray eyes.
"However, you are wrong, Shadow. The glass blade does not belong to you or any of your kin. It had been entrusted to our foremother, who passed on the duty of protecting it to her wards, and through them to us."
The woman lingered, then sighed.
"However, it is not my place to put you in yours. Come, demoness, let me welcome you to the temple of the Chalice."
With that, the war maidens slowly lowered their weapons, and then followed their leader as she turned to walk on the path through the graveyard of swords. Surrounded by them, Saint, Sonny, and Kai had no choice but to walk forward. After a few moments, the taciturn demon gracefully jumped down from Nightmare's back, who then dissipated into shadows and returned to Sonny's soul. Despite the fact that the beautiful female warriors had sheathed their swords, their hostility remained aimed at the 3 strangers, and their gazes were still as sharp and dangerous as steel blades.
What an unfriendly bunch.
Sonny sighed inwardly, and then looked around through his shadows, paying attention to the countless swords thrust into the ground all around them. Somehow, he felt that each of these weapons had a history, a violent story of battle and bloodshed that ended in death. Perhaps some of these blades had once belonged to the war maidens of the past, but most must have been wielded by those warriors slain by the members of the sect. There were really many swords thrust into the ground around the stone temple. Soon, they approached the gates of the magnificent structure and were led inside. Sonny was somewhat familiar with the interior of the ancient shrine, but it was hard to bring together 2 pictures that lived in his mind. One of a desolate ruin, the other of the austere but formidable and perfectly maintained temple fortress. They were ushered into a spacious entrance hall, where Saint followed his command and stopped. As though unwilling to go further, the tall maiden with gray eyes glanced at her and smiled coldly.
"Wait here, demoness. I will inform the elders of your arrival, and you challenge."
Saint stood with the blade of the soul serpent resting on her shoulder, motionless like a beautiful statue cut of black onyx. Her presence was aloof and indifferent, as though the three of them were not surrounded from all sides by fearsome warriors with no way to escape. The tall maiden left, but the rest of the sentinels remained, surrounding them in a wide circle. Their faces were calm, but their eyes remained sharp, steady hands laying on the hilts of their swords. Under their gazes, Sunny didn't dare to send one of his shadows to scout around the temple. However, he also didn't need to. Instead, he listened to the sounds surrounding them with curiosity. The temple of the Chalice seemed silent, but somewhere far away a repeating sound could be heard. The sound of something blunt hitting flesh over and over again, and an occasional rattle of chains. Disturbed, he frowned slightly and then glanced at Kai. The archer stood on the other side of Saint, his face hidden in the shadow of a deep hood. His pose seemed both polite and relaxed. However, Sunny could feel a strange tension hidden behind this casual stance. He frowned, and then moved his hand slightly, attracting his friend's attention. Kai lingered for a moment, then spoke in the language of the waking world without turning his head.
Well, yes, I found it.
Why would Sunny need to use his shadows to explore the temple if he had Nightingale by his side? Kai's awakened ability, after all, allowed him to see far and wide and even peer through solid objects. Very few things could hide from his gaze. So, his task was to locate one of the two things they were looking for, the glass knife. And just in a few minutes, he had already succeeded. Kai, however, did not seem too happy.
Sunny, I think we might have a slight problem.
Damnation.
Sunny scowled, not liking the tone of his friend's voice one bit. He turned his head slightly, glaring at the young man in the wooden mask. The archer sighed.
You see, in the center of the temple, there is a large hall, and in the center of that hall stands a giant stone chalice. The chalice is filled to the brim with raging white flame. That fire is just like the fires that burn in the sky below. In fact, I am pretty sure that one of those orbs of divine flame is somehow contained within it.
He lingered for a moment, and then added grimly.
The glass knife is on the bottom of the chalice, right in the middle of the annihilating divine flame.
Damn it all. Why did it have to be the divine flame of all things?
The three of them were finally allowed into the central hall of the temple, where a tall chalice cut of a single slab of gray stone stood, full of blinding white fire. The hall was drowning in stark light, deep shadows, and suffocating heat. However, even that sweltering heat was too forgiving. This close to the orb of sun god's flame, all of them should have been already turned to ash. Sunny stared at the chalice with a grim expression, remembering the suffering he had gone through in the sky below. This was a true remnant of the obliterating pillar of white fire that had been brought down on the kingdom of hope by a god, and then continued to burn in the depths of the shattered land, slowly devouring it until nothing but an empty void remained. The pale version of it that he was able to channel through the cruel sight was already immensely destructive. And this was the real deal. How was the chalice even capable of containing the annihilating white star? He shivered, and then glanced under the surface of the stone vessel, noticing an intricate weave of ancient runes glowing inside the gray stone. An enchantment, and a powerful one at that. What kind of sorcerer had created it? Who had been powerful enough to contain a piece of divine fury? In any case, without knowing how to control the enchantment, if there even was a way to control it, getting the glass knife out was not going to be easy, or maybe even impossible. Their task just grew exponentially more difficult.
Damn it all.
Absorbed by the dire sight of the stone chalice, Sunny didn't even notice the three women standing in front of it for a moment or two. When he did, however, his mood dropped even further, turned into black silhouettes by the furious white flame burning behind them. Three ascended battle masters watched the uninvited guests with eyes full of cold, cutting, killing intent. One had red hair and wielded an odachi similar to his own, its blade forged out of vibrant scarlet steel. One had black hair and held a simple spear, its shaft covered by a complicated weave of runes. One had white hair and was unarmed. That last one scared him the most. Solving, too, didn't feel the need to wield a weapon. If the first two maidens seemed like warriors of terrifying skill, the third one gave him a sensation of being something much more than that. A true vessel of war, perhaps. He carefully looked around the hall, remembering how it had looked in the future. The stone slabs covering the floor had been cracked and misshapen, the mighty pillars broken and toppled over the roof had collapsed. The walls of the hall, seemingly so strong and unassailable, had been shattered outwards, suggesting that something had detonated in the center of the hall with tremendous force. The chalice itself had been destroyed, with only a few fragments laying on the floor in a molten pile, and there had been human bones littering the hall, some still covered by the remains of red silk garments, with vengeful wraiths carrying murderous fury even thousands of years after the tragedy. Sunny glanced tensely at the dancing white flame, then shivered. Someone had come to the temple of the chalice and destroyed it, slaughtering all the fearsome maidens in the process. Had they been looking for the glass knife as well? Was he going to meet that terrifying being? Or had he, perhaps, met them already? Two faces suddenly appeared in his mind, that of Solving and that of Noctis. His thoughts were interrupted by one of the ascended maidens. The woman who seemed the most powerful, the fiend with white hair, looked at Saint with a cold expression and said, her voice echoing in the stark darkness of the hall.
Been told that you wish to retrieve the legacy of our foremothers, Shad.
Saint lingered for a moment, then moved her head slightly, nodding. The maiden smiled, sending chills running down Sunny's spine.
It is very simple. All you have to do is prove yourself before the chalice, kill me and then my two sisters. If you do, the glass blade will be yours.
Saint tilted her head a little, expressing an indifferent agreement. Sunny let out a furtive sigh of relief. So, there was a ritual to release that glass knife into someone's hands after all, a trial that those seeking it had to pass. A simple duel, or rather 3 consecutive ones, against the senior warriors of the ancient sect. These ascended were truly formidable, but fighting them was better than having to face against the entire sect. His worst expectations had not come true. As for whether or not Saint would be able to kill the 3 ascended priestesses, he wasn't sure. However, there was at least a chance, and after the leaders of the sect were dead, finding and rescuing Effie would be much easier. As the war maiden with white hair grew silent, another one, the woman wielding the scarlet odachi, spoke.
First, you will have to prove that you have the right to challenge us. You will fight and kill a disciple of each of us.
As soon as she stopped speaking, the third one said,
Or you will die.
Sunny hid a triumphant smile. 3 awakened warriors were not going to pose any threat to Saint, who was an ascended demon and formidable well beyond her rank and class. However, something felt off. He couldn't tell what at the moment, but his intuition was filling his hearts with unease. Sunny glanced at Kai and noticed a similar apprehensive expression in the archer's eyes. He nodded slightly, prompting the young man to step forward and bow.
My lady accepts. However, it is unbecoming of her to slaughter your disciples, fearsome as they may be. Such a fight would not be a struggle for her, and as such would not please the goddess of life, offending her in this sacred temple. If these disciples wish to challenge my lady, they will have to defeat her shadow first.
The war maiden with white hair laughed, then took a step forward.
Only fight us after defeating our disciples, but our disciples can only fight her after defeating her pet demon. Fine, let it be so. No shadow can defeat a vessel of war. He was going to die after you lady's body is torn apart anyway. Let the creature be destroyed first.
With that, she turned to one of the younger war maidens and smiled darkly.
Let us not disappoint our guests. Go, bring the feral child I have the misfortune of calling my successor here. She will atone for her transgressions today by killing these 2 shadows.
Sunny was pushed forward and offered a choice of weapons. After hesitating for a few moments, He raised a fearsome greatsword with his upper hands and took a buckler and a long dagger with the lower. Then he walked into the center of the hall and froze, watching the divine flames burn in the darkness. All things considered, things had turned out well. The ascended war maidens had been cunning, offering the lives of their disciples as sacrifices. No doubt in order to glean the secrets of Saint's skill before facing her. Knowing the enemy was half the victory, after all. By remaining a mystery while observing how their opponent fights, the three battle masters would have received an advantage that Sunny couldn't allow himself to give them. Now, however, he was going to fight and kill 3 of the awakened maidens, thus keeping Saint as mysterious as these battle masters were. Facing such fearsome opponents was not going to be easy. But he was sure of his ability to outsmart, overpower, and slaughter them. Fighting such skilled warriors was only going to enrich his mastery of shadow dance. More importantly, they were not going to have to fight against the whole sect. The chalice containing the divine flame was not going to be shattered, and the temple was not going to be turned into a ruin. Whatever it had been that had happened here in the real world would not befall Sunny and Kai, leaving them unscathed. All he had to do was to kill 3 young women one after another. They would be fearsome combatants, no doubt, especially due to the madness of hope coursing through their veins. But he had faced far worse. Sunny felt confident in his ability. A few moments later, however, his black eyes narrowed. Staring at his first opponent, Sunny couldn't help but shudder and let out a low growl, muttering a bitter curse under his breath. When Sunny heard the white-haired war maiden refer to her disciple as a feral child, he assumed that she was speaking about an especially ferocious female warrior being trained in the ancient sect of war. What he had not expected, however, was that his enemy would turn out to be a literal child. Sunny breathed a quiet curse. As Sunny watched with a grim expression, 2 of the awakened maidens dragged a girl of about 11, maybe 12 years of age into the hall, then threw her on the stone floor in front of him. The girl had a scrawny, juvenile body that did not seem to have touched on the path to maturity yet. Her short, wild hair was of a vibrant red color, almost the same as the torn silk garment she wore. Her skin was pale and white, or at least it was supposed to be. Instead, it was blue and black, almost the same color as Sunny's own, which had been made to resemble obsidian by the embrace of his shadows. The girl had obviously been often and cruelly beaten, to the point that it was hard to notice a spot free of bruises on her once tender body. The whites of her eyes were hidden by the cloudy red layer of blood that had burst from ruptured vessels, making the child look like an actual beast. Hitting the floor, the girl remained motionless for a few moments, then let out a long sigh and slowly stood up, lean muscles rolling under her bruised and lacerated skin. Even though she seemed tall for her age, she was still too small to reach up to Sunny's chest.
Curse these mad witches.
Suddenly full of fury, he glanced at the 3 ascended war maidens with a dark expression, then looked down at the abused child in front of him. Was this whom he had to kill? Just a few moments ago, the task seemed so easy. The girl, meanwhile, finished picking herself from the floor and faced the war maidens with an insolent, contemptuous expression on her bruised face. With wild flames burning in her eyes, she spat a bit of blood on the floor and then bared her teeth in a feral grin.
What now, you old hags? More training? And here I was just starting to enjoy my daily punishment.
Despite the rude words and the recalcitrant tone, the girl's voice was soft and childishly high, and as the result, what she had meant to sound defiant ended up sounding comical instead. Flustered by that, she gritted her teeth and then proceeded to make a rude gesture with her hand, as if to better articulate her point. Sunny's heart suddenly grew cold. His flinched slightly, his pupils widening in shock.
No.
He was already torn about the fact that he would have to kill a child, and this was going to be a battle to the death whether he wanted to or not. The war maidens had made it abundantly clear. Showing mercy would be the same as admitting defeat, thus surrendering both his own life and that of Kai to their slaughter. But when the girl spoke, things took a turn from bad to worse, because even if he had not recognized that tone, which he instantly did, Sunny was pretty sure that the inhabitants of the Kingdom of Hope were not in the habit of expressing their meaning with their middle fingers. That was a thing humans in the waking world did, which left only one possibility. The feral child in front of him was Effie.
Got him it.
Now, there was no chance at all that he would kill his opponent and follow the ritual set for them by the maidens. All that stuff about not having to fight the entire sect he had felt relieved about a few minutes ago. Any possibility of that was basically gone. How were they going to get out of this one? He gritted his teeth, a low growl escaping through them. Hearing it, the senior war maiden smiled coldly and then stared at Effie.
Today, insolent child, instead a test. We have guests today, you see. Kill them, and I might order your older sisters to feed you today. You have been demanding food, have you not?
The mention of food, a somber expression appeared on the girl's bruised face. She hesitated for a moment and then turned around, searching for these guests she was supposed to kill. Because of how the hall was lit, the figures of everyone who stood near the entrance and along the walls, Saint Kai and dozens of war maidens who were here to witness the challenge, appeared as dark silhouettes. The only one whom she could clearly see was Sunny. Effie stared at his abdomen for a few moments, confused. Then she slowly craned her neck, looking higher and higher, and then higher still. Her face gradually grew paler and paler, until a hint of fear appeared in her eyes.
Woes, hey there, big guys.
She shivered, then glanced back at her teacher.
Are you joking? I am supposed to kill that monster.
The war maiden shook her head.
It's not a monster, a demon. Why are you not hungry?
Effie lingered for a few moments, then asked in a little voice.
Do I get any weapons, at least?
The white-haired warrior chuckled cruelly.
Your fists should be enough. Use your tongue if they're not. It has been sharper than a blade lately, after all.
The scrawny girl grimaced, then sighed and clenched her fist, turning to Sunny with hunger and resentment mixing in the bright eyes. Her soft voice resounded in the hall, full of reluctant determination.
All right then, let's kill a demon. All the things a girl must do to earn a dinner.
Sunny lowered his sword, staring at her with furious intent.
You idiot, it's me. Are you going to recognize me or not?
A weave of runes suddenly ignited on the stone floor of the hall, creating a circle around them. There was some sort of a barrier preventing either from escaping now and outsiders from offering them help. The only ones left inside were Sunny, Effie, and the three war maidens standing in front of the chalice. Sunny hissed, trying to get the child to look at him.
Craps, the emerald amulet. I better get it right now.
He released the hilt of the greatsword with one hand, intending to use it to fish out the amulet from the folds of his kimono.
If Effie doesn't recognize me, I'll have to really fight her until I come up with a plan. Luckily, she is just an awakened. With my 3 cores and shadow augmentation, it should not be 2.
Before he could finish the thought, however, the scrawny girl suddenly lunged forward with shocking speed and struck him in the abdomen with her tiny fist. The towering four-armed demon folded like a piece of paper, spat a torrent of blood, and was thrown a dozen meters back like a weightless doll, crashing into a stone pillar. He sent a net of cracks running through its gray surface and then rolled down to the floor, stunned by the tremendous, ridiculous force of that single blow. Sunny tried to push air into his 4 empty lungs and stared at the little girl with dread.
Right, and that is Effie, all right, curses.
Because of Effie's easygoing personality and affable attitude, it was easy to forget just how fearsome of a warrior she was. Out of all the members of the cohort, she had survived on the Forgotten Shore the longest. She had done so while hunting down nightmare creatures on the cursed streets of the Dark City all alone as well, mostly because anyone willing to help her would have been disposed of by the ruler of the Bright Castle, who had been scorned by her rejection. The fact that the young huntress had never bowed to his demands despite the black mark placed on her only went to show how unyielding her will really was. Her aspect made Effie a perfect instrument of war. While not as drastic as the dire but narrow speed augmentation caster had possessed, it was still great and wondrous. More importantly, it was an all-around enhancement. Speed, strength, agility, endurance, resilience. Every facet of her physicality was elevated to an inhuman level. Sunny knew of her abilities better than most, since Effie had taught him how to wield a spear. However, due to the fact that their lessons had taken place in the real world, where the huntress was bound to a wheelchair, he never experienced her full strength in a fight himself, until now.
Crap, that really hurts.
Before, Sunny had hoped that their strength would be more or less equal, considering that he was augmented by 3 shadows. However, it was not even close. That one blow almost shattered his body into pieces. That was only made more bizarre by the fact that it had been delivered by a scrawny child. Maybe if he had an additional shadow or 2. Sunny had become much more powerful, but Effie had grown much stronger after the Forgotten Shore as well. Her core was now fully saturated. More than that, while Sunny had been surviving in the Red Colosseum, she had survived a hell of her own, it seemed. Being tortured, taught, and tempered by the cult that had created Solvane of all people. Sunny spat some blood, gritted his teeth, and slowly stood up.
Oh, this is not good.
The little girl glanced at him with surprise and tilted her head a little.
You still alive, damn tough bastard.
He thought of taking out the emerald amulet once again, but Effie gave him no time. A split second later, she was already upon him, her leg flying through the air toward his ribcage. Sunny had no time to think about anything. He didn't want to hurt his friend, but he also didn't want to die. And getting hit by this bruised, wild, monstrous girl was going to kill him soon enough, no doubt.
I need to slow her down.
Even if his ribs survived Effie's wicked kick due to bone weave, the organs protected by them were not that resilient. The shock would surely rupture something important. Gritting his teeth, Sunny thrust one of his lower hands forward, putting the sharp blade of the dagger in the path of Effie's small, bony, and bruised leg. She was going to have to rethink that attack or risk having her calf cut wide open. Unless she was using her second aspect ability, of course.
Curse it.
The dagger slid off the girl's skin without leaving even a scratch on it, as though it was made out of tempered steel. Luckily, Sunny had expected this outcome and was already dodging out of the way. Effie's shin hit the pillar instead of his side, sending a rain of large stone chunks and sharp shards flying through the air. Before Sunny could regain his balance, the next attack came. And then the next, and the next, and the next. Unable to seriously hurt the girl, he had no choice but to retreat under the onslaught of deadly strikes, receiving several glancing blows that left him reeling and in pain. The scrawny girl was very small, but made up for it by being incredibly nimble and swift. The little imp was so wily and fast, in fact, that it almost felt as though she was in several places at the same time.
Stop running, big guy. Let us finish this quickly. I am hella hungry, you know.
Would you slow down for a second, you devil child?
Sunny growled with unrestrained fury and brought the greatsword down, creating some space between himself and the advancing girl. He felt very, very, very frustrated. All he had to do for now was to let Effie know who he was. That was not very hard to do. There were many ways, really. He could use one of his shadows or summon a familiar memory. If only she gave him a damned moment to breathe and think. The problem was that Effie did not. She was also not fighting in any style Sunny was familiar with. He knew her usual technique pretty well, but this assault had nothing in common with it. In fact, her current ferocious style was leagues beyond what the Huntress had been capable of in the past, both in terms of purpose and lethality. It was sort of breathtaking, even when performed by a scrawny child. A memory was the easiest option, since summoning one took only a thought and several seconds. However, that was also the worst option, because doing so would reveal his ability to summon things out of thin air to the maidens. He and Kai had not gone through the trouble of appearing unarmed just to give that advantage away immediately.
Thank you, fool.
There had to be a better way. Sunny deflected another devastating kick and took a step back, then froze for a split second, and threw his buckler away. The thing was hideously bent by now, anyway. With one of his hands now free, he made it into a fist and sent it flying forward, and extended his middle finger with a vicious snarl. Effie, who was already preparing to launch another attack, blinked a couple of times, then looked up at the towering demon with confusion.
In the hose.
Finally.
Using Effie's momentary confusion, Sunny lowered his hand and mimed grabbing the rim of a wheel and moving it forward and backward as if pushing a wheelchair. The little girl frowned, then lunged forward and delivered a crushing strike, but this time, her movements were a bit slower, allowing him to easily dodge out of the way, purposefully so, making sure that Effie could see his hand. He attacked with the greatsword while simultaneously making a fist again and pretending to have an arm wrestling match with an invisible opponent. The little girl swatted the sword away with her naked forearm, and then her blood-red eyes suddenly widened. She craned her neck and stared at the towering demon with an inexorable expression, then blurted out in a soft, childish voice.
A day doofus.
Thank God took you long enough.
Sunny pretended to attack her with the dagger, then dodged a similarly half-hearted kick and gave the little girl a short nod. Effie's face trembled, and then she whispered,
Why the spell are you so damn tall?
Sunny stared at the little girl, trying not to lose his composure.
And what is wrong with these people?
He had 2 horns, a mouth full of sharp fangs, long claws, and 4 damned arms. And yet, the first thing that both Effie and Kai had reacted to was his height. Was he not allowed to be tall for once? Continuing to pretend to fight the monstrous child in earnest, he pointed to his chest instead of an answer. Effie, too, slowed down her relentless assault a bit, just enough to give him some breathing room without making her changed attitude obvious. A few moments later, when they were close to each other, she hissed quietly.
Let me guess, you saw the message I left that said to not come to the Temple of Chalice, and naturally decided to do the exact opposite.
Sunny spun, avoiding her fist, and raised 2 fingers. The girl frowned.
Someone else is with you? Cassie, Kai, it's Kai. So both of you decided to ignore my warning.
She deflected his dagger to the side, grimaced, when it slid over a barely healed laceration on her forearm, and then squeaked in her childish voice.
Well, good. I might have been too full of myself, thinking that I would be able to actually escape this damned place. So, I am really, really glad that you came.
Sunny thrust his greatsword forward, narrowly missing the girl's head, and then let out a low growl. Effie gritted her teeth.
But Sunny, we have 2 problems. One is that these lunatics never let their disciples leave the sect alive. The second is that if one of us doesn't kill the other in this duel, my teachers are going to kill us both. So.
She caught his sword with one hand, then brought her fist on its blade, shattering it and making Sunny stumble.
So I hope that you have a plan. No, I know you do, don't you?
Despite how beaten and bruised the girl was, her soft voice sounded optimistic and cheerful. Knowing that Effie was confident in his ability to get them both out of this dire situation alive, somehow Sunny felt very validated. The problem was that he did not have a plan. In fact, he didn't have the slightest idea about how to survive this mess. Yet, so he simply shook his head, making Effie pale and grow silent. As they continued to fight, Sunny thought feverishly. He didn't see any chance of escaping the Temple of the Chalice without a bloody battle against the War Maidens, as well as any way for the 3 of them to come up on top in that battle. Effie was strong and fearsome, but she was not solving. She would not have been able to fight her way out of the sect as that fiend had. With Kai and Sunny added into the equation, however, things still didn't look too good. Out of the three, Sunny was the powerhouse. Even though his physical might was lesser than that of the Huntress overall, he was a much deadlier creature. Added to that were his three shadows, two of which were ascended demons, while the third was an awakened terror. Sunny alone was most likely enough to contain 2 out of the 3 senior war maidens, at least. Effie would have to handle the third one, which would leave Kai alone against dozens of awakened warriors gathered in the hall. That wouldn't work. No matter how Sunny moved the elements of the theoretical battle, nothing gave them a good chance of escaping alive. However, there had to be a way. The war maidens had been defeated in the future, after all, so they were not invincible. Thinking of the future, he hesitated for a moment, and then glanced at the massive stone chalice towering in the center of the hall, full of furious white flame. Unlike in the future, it was still whole and imposing, the complex enchantment that permeated the ancient stone holding the mass of divine fire contained inside. His face grew dim.
I don't like this idea. No, I don't like it at all.
Indeed, he was not happy with the seed of a plan that suddenly appeared in his mind, not only because it would be extremely dangerous and hard to pull off, but also because going through with it had broader, far-reaching implications he didn't want to think about. But no matter how hard Sunny thought, he couldn't come up with anything else to do. If moving the elements did not work, the only way to achieve his goal was to change them. With a deep sigh, he concentrated for a few moments, and then gestured Effie to keep close. At the same time, several things happened. Outside of the circle of runes, Saint lowered the soul serpent and then outstretched one hand, which suddenly became shrouded in a swarm of white sparks. She took a small step to the side to shield Kai with her body. Both actions caused the war maidens surrounding them to grow tense, their hands gripping the hilts of their weapons. Within the circle, Sunny had become surrounded by countless onyx threads that ensnared his body. One of his 4 hands was enveloped by a swarm of scarlet sparks, one in a black fog and the other 2 in a swirling mass of dancing sparks of white light. The 3 senior maidens overseeing the fight frowned when they saw the 4-armed demon undergo a strange transmutation. Although just a little, their stances shifted, revealing their readiness to intervene should a need arise. But they didn't move yet, reluctant to intrude upon the duel without an undeniable reason. A few seconds later, a kite shield forged out of dull steel appeared on Saint's arm, while the odachi she held silently slid into the shadows. Sunny was suddenly clad in intricate onyx armor, holding a somber spear in one of his lower hands and an austere tack in another. Finally, a black bow with a scarlet string and a strange arrow that seemed to be made out of a bolt of lightning appear in his upper hands. Patented Avenger, Cruel Sight, Midnight Shard, Morgan's Warbow Strike of Thunder, and Mantle of the Underworld augmented by Memory of Fire. He had summoned all these memories at the same time, knowing that he might not have a chance to do so later. And there was one last memory that he had called upon. As the light around him suddenly dimmed, the shape of a small black lantern started to manifest itself in the air. Spinning around before the senior war maidens reacted, Sunny knocked the strike of thunder on the string of his bow. Then, he poured a massive flood of essence into the bow and drew it, activating the Death Dealer enchantment.
Unbending enchantment's description, this adamantine bow demands a giant's might to be bent. Because of that, arrows shot from it travel as far as the eye can see and strike with terrible strength, piercing both armor and flesh. Death Dealer enchantment description, this bow is able to consume a large amount of essence to deliver an obliterating strike.
And finally,
Caged Lightning enchantment description, this arrow strikes as fast as a bolt of lightning and chains its devastating damage to several nearby creatures.
feeling his reserves of essence instantly diminish by a vast amount, Sunny gritted his teeth and released the string. At the last moment, all 3 of his shadows slid off his fingers and wrapped themselves around the strike of thunder. And so, this ascended arrow of the 2nd tier was sent flying from an ascended bow of the 4th tier its power augmented manyfold by the three shadows and the obliterating influence of the Death Dealer enchantment. A shot like that would probably be enough to kill a master. The arrow was too fast to be intercepted as well. However, Sunny had not aimed at any of the three senior war maidens. Instead, he aimed his arrow at the stone chalice, and not anywhere on it at that. No, he sent the strike of thunder at the exact spot on the ancient stone surface where the weave of invisible runes was the most intense and elaborate. Sunny doubted that even this combination of powers and enchantments would be enough to deal real damage to the stone vessel. However, if he could destroy a small but important part of its enchantment, the divine flame contained within would do the rest. As the bolt of lightning streaked through the air toward the chalice, he grabbed the little girl and dashed behind one of the columns, then knelt and hugged her with all four arms, covering her little body with his. At the same time, Saint pushed Kai back and raised her shield, covering them both. Before anyone could react, the furious lightning struck the side of the giant stone chalice. And then everything became white. The bolt of darkness-wreathed lightning shot between two of the senior war maidens and struck the side of the stone chalice. A flash of light drowned the hall for a split second, and almost instantly, three arcs of electricity tore through the air, traveling back to strike the sect leaders. Since there was no one else near them, the lightning did not chain further, spending all its might while coursing through the bodies of the ascended warriors. Sunny did not see any of that, however, because he was already dashing toward a wide stone pillar with Effie's scrawny figure held in his arms. Behind him, a single narrow crack appeared on the surface of the chalice, and through it, a furious white light suddenly shone. A moment later, countless fractures appeared on the ancient stone, and then everything became white. Sunny was on his knees behind the column, his back to the center of the hall, hugging Effie with all his four arms. His vision was gone, replaced by an endless field of flawless white, and so was his hearing. He felt a shockwave go through his body, and the pillar behind him shatter, turning into a rain of broken, melting stone. Then a flash of agony pierced his soul. Everything was enveloped by terrifying, suffocating heat. He felt it wash over him like a wave, and prayed that they would survive its immolating embrace. He had a reason to believe that they would. In the future, there had been bones littering the floor of the hall, after all. That meant that when the real chalice exploded, not everyone around it had been turned to ash. Sunny also had the stalwart enchantment of the mantle of the underworld, providing him with high resistance to elemental attacks, as well as underworld armament enchantment, channeling and enhancing the protective effect of the memory of fire through the onyx armor. That was not going to be enough to withstand divine flame itself, but could save him, and Effie, whom he was shielding with his towering body, from the heat produced by the flame. A few moments later, the white field veiling his sight suddenly dimmed and gave way to beautiful darkness. The shadow lantern was devouring the light surrounding its master. Uncaring for what had produced it, after a couple more seconds, Sunny was finally able to discern the shape of his surroundings. The sight of the great hall was all too familiar. The stone chalice lay in a molten pile on the stone floor, which was cracked and shattered. Most of the pillars supporting the roof had toppled, and so did a section of the roof itself, revealing a piece of the night sky with stars shining on its black canvas. The walls of the hall were fractured and had collapsed outward, just like they would be in the future. All over the devastated chamber, small pieces of the divine flame burned. Some danced on shards of stone, slowly devouring it, some on the charred corpses of those war maidens that had been killed in the blast. However, the flames did not seem to be spreading. Strangely, there were numerous runes shining on what remained of the hall's floor and ceiling, weakening them. Perhaps because of those runes, many of the war maidens survived.
Corset.
The three ascended were all alive, although two of the three were severely wounded. Whether by the lightning of the strike of thunder, the explosion, or the divine flame, Sunny did not know. Some of their awakened disciples had survived as well, and were now slowly rising from the ground, shock and fury written on their pale faces. And Sunny was alive too, but not unscathed. His body was not damaged. But one of his shadows seemed to have been too slow to retreat from the chalice and had gotten itself burned a little by the divine flame. Since the 3 shadows were manifestations of his soul, it was burned as well. Gritting his teeth, Sonny endured the pain and rose to his feet. Soul damage. Well, what else was new? Just as he thought that, the shadows slid between the dancing flames and attached themselves to his feet, one cradling its damaged arm with 3 hands. Effie looked around with shock, a sweat rolling down her little face.
What the hell happened? You see crazy.
She spoke and instantly regretted it when a torrent of scorchingly hot air streamed into her mouth. Sonny evaluated the situation, then pushed the little girl away, gesturing at the far end of the hall. There, Kai was levitating above the floor, his hood torn, and his wooden mask glowing angrily, as if seconds from catching on fire. The young man was surrounded by a whirlwind of white sparks, no doubt summoning his armor and weapons. He was also surrounded by a dozen surviving war maidens. Effie's eyes widened, and she took a step in his direction, but then hesitated and looked at Sonny with concern.
What about the masters?
He glanced at the 3 ascended warriors, and then simply pointed a finger at himself. The little girl wanted to say something, her eyes full of worry and unease, but then nodded and dashed away, summoning her own memories. Left alone, Sonny dismissed Morgan's warbow, transferred the cruel sight to his upper hands, and slowly walked toward the fearsome battle masters. 3 shadows followed him, and whenever he passed, the light was destroyed and replaced by darkness. The 4-armed demon in onyx armor stopped a dozen or so meters away from the leaders of the Red Sect and tilted his head a little, staring at them with his black eyes. The white-haired ascended, the only one who remained unscathed after the explosion, looked at him with cold hatred, then smiled wildly and spat.
Shadow, you dare challenge the 3 of us alone.
The maiden with red hair gritted her teeth and moved her badly burned arm, raising the scarlet Odachi into a battle-ready position. The one with black hair leaned heavily on her spear, then whispered something, causing the runes on the weapon to ignite with an angry red glow. Sonny remained motionless for a second, then shook his head, and grinned, revealing his sharp fangs. A moment later, 3 terrifying creatures burst from his shadows, fury burning in their eyes. One was a giant serpent with obsidian scales. One was a dreadful black steed with adamantine horns and fangs like those of a wolf. And the third one was a graceful knight in onyx armor, wielding a charred kite shield and a stone sword. Together, the 4 shadows lunged forward. An awakened had no business fighting one ascended, let alone 3, each radiating an aura of an aberrant battle master. But then again, as far as awakened went, Sonny was more than a little abnormal himself. He had already killed 2 masters before, Pierce, one of the wardens of the Night Temple, and the fearsome Red Priest, the slave overseer of the Colosseum. Both victories had been won by the skin of his teeth and cost him dearly. Sonny had even lost his head in one of those battles. The War Maiden seemed far more daunting than both of those men, and there were 3 of them. The previous clashes with the Ascended he had were nothing compared to the dire challenge of this one. However, during both of those fights, Sonny hadn't had the opportunity to go full out. The first time, Saint and Serpent had been preoccupied with the human echoes. The second time, he had been cut off from the spell and thus from his arsenal of memories. But this time, nothing was preventing Sonny from unleashing the full and dreadful power of his divine aspect. It was time to show what he was truly capable of when nothing held him back. Fortunately, 2 of the War Maidens had already been injured by Sonny's treacherous attack. So, although attacking the 3 of them alone seemed more than a little bit insane, there was a good chance that he would win this fight. As the 3 ascended prepared to deflect the assault of shadows, Saint lowered her shoulder, put it behind the patient Avenger, and aimed the charred kite shield at the enemies.
Burning Heart enchantment description. This shield can store a portion of fire damage it receives to augment another weapon of its wielder or unleash a devastating shockwave.
A deep metallic groan resounded from within the shield, and then an invisible shockwave exploded outward from its dull steel surface. The patient Avenger had absorbed plenty of fire damage during the explosion of divine flames, and now, all that furious force was released forward, shattering the chunks of stone that littered the cracked floor into dust and sending the War Masters flying back into different directions. Whatever chance of a coordinated defense they had before was now utterly gone. Without slowing down, Sunny and his shadows split. The Soul Serpent slithered between the dancing flames, lunging at the maiden that wielded a spear. Saint ran toward the maiden that wielded an odachi. And finally, Sunny and Nightmare flew toward the maiden that was unarmed, but radiated the most pressure.
Come on.
Everything was going according to plan. However, no plan ever survived a clash with reality. A moment later, something unexpected happened, putting a wrinkle into Sunny's stratagem. The woman with black hair twisted in the air and gracefully landed on her feet, plunging the tip of her glowing spear into the stone floor to stop herself from sliding back into the white wall of divine flame burning behind her. And then, there were suddenly two of her. Two identical war maidens jumped to their feet, each holding an identical glowing spear. None looked like an illusion, and both possessed real shadows. Both were made of flesh and bone, which meant that the threat she posed instantly doubled.
What kind of an insane aspect is that?
Sunny bared his fangs, changing the plan on the fly. Nightmare pivoted and switched direction, aiming to join Soul Serpent and help it destroy the two spear-wielding Ascended. One of the shadows cast by Sunny swiftly glided forward, wrapping itself around the black steed. The other two rose and embraced Sunny himself, since he was now facing the most fearsome of the War Masters alone. Saint was going to have to deal with her own opponent without any augmentations. He wasn't too worried, though. Out of the four of them, she was probably the most powerful. A moment later, the War Maidens and the shadows clashed. To Sunny's left, Nightmare and the Soul Serpent attacked the two identical black-haired women. Now that the Shadow Steed was apart from Sunny and outside the area where the Shadow Lantern was devouring all light, the effect of the Dark Destrier attribute was lessened, depriving him of its augmentation. However, the Dreadlord attribute was still working. No matter how confident and fearsome the War Maidens appeared, they had to be in the throes of fear and confusion deep down in their hearts. After all, their sacred chalice had just been unexpectedly destroyed, and scores of their sisters had been killed in the explosion. Added to Nightmare's mantle of fear ability, even powerful Ascended like them would not be able to resist the creeping terror. And the more terrified they were, the more powerful the Black Courser would become. So, Sunny was not worried about Serpent and Nightmare either. To his right, Saint clashed with the red-haired Ascended, their blades crossing with melodious ringing. The War Maiden pushed, causing the taciturn demon to stagger and make a quick step back. Considering how much the living statue weighed, this must have taken tremendous strength. So, this one possessed some sort of a physical augmentation aspect. Her terrible burns seemed to be healing with incredible speed too, which meant that the aspect gifted her with a miraculous regeneration rate as well. And lastly, there was a deep nick left on the blade of Saint Stone's sword. Either the enchantments of the Scarlet Odachi were especially powerful, or the woman possessed an ability capable of reinforcing her weapons too. Still, Sunny was confident that his silent shadow would be able to win. The only member of their team he was somewhat worried about was himself. Raising the cruel sight above his left shoulder and lowering the midnight shard to his right thigh, Sunny lunged at the white-haired War Maiden, who was still calm, entirely unscathed and unarmed.
Let's see what kind of a fiend you are then.
Looking at the attacking demon with cold hatred, the woman simply outstretched her empty hands. And in the next moment, the stone shards and the dancing flames around them suddenly moved.
What the?
The shards of stone and the dancing flames moved, flying through the air toward the tall woman. Instead of crushing and burning her, however, they somehow assembled around her slender body, the pieces of stone levitating around it to form a strange armor, the fire shrouding her hands like incandescent gloves. Sunny suddenly felt a deeply dangerous sense of unease.
How dare you, vile shadow?
The voice of the war madding thundered in the darkness that the shadow lantern had created. And then, two furious white eyes ignited in its depths, piercing Sunny with a murderous gaze.
How dare you challenge war?
A split second later, the maiden disappeared from where she stood, the stone slab beneath her feet exploding into a rain of shards. Almost instantly, she was already upon him, a flame-wreathed palm shooting forward to pierce his chest.
Damnation, what is it with women of war always going straight for my heart? This is already the third time this happens.
Sunny awkwardly blocked the devastating blow and felt himself being thrown back by the terrifying force of the impact. Luckily, the mantle of the underworld had withstood the touch of the divine flames that shrouded his enemy's hands, if just barely, the enhanced enchantment of memory of fire still coursing through its polished onyx. Something wasn't right here. Even for a master, the speed and strength of this woman were way too terrifying. With 3 cores nearing full saturation and augmented with 2 shadows, he was supposed to be near the realm of the ascended, at least, if not more or less on par with some of them. And yet, her might was far greater than his. That could have been explained by possessing an aspect that augmented one's physicality, but as Sunny had just seen. The white-haired war maiden seemed to be some sort of an elemental sorceress.
I see how it is.
Crashing onto the floor in a roll, he instantly threw the cruel sight forward to prevent his enemy from chaining the next attack after the first, and then slashed at her with the midnight shard. The blade of the austere takai scraped fruitlessly across the carapace of levitating stone shards surrounding the war maiden's body. It seemed that the effect of her aspect was broader than just elemental control. Not only was the fearsome leader of the Red Sect capable of manipulating the elements, she also drew power from them. The stone probably enhanced her strength and endurance, the fire, her speed, attack power. Whatever it was, it seemed to also allow the white-haired maiden to perceive her surroundings despite the veil of shadows his lantern was creating around them. With a ruthless scowl on her beautiful face, the woman easily swatted both the cruel sight and the midnight shard to the sides. However, she failed to defend against the sharp blade of the ghostly stiletto that suddenly appeared in one of Sunny's hands and slid between the chunks of stone protecting her body. The moonlight shard bit into the maiden's body. Failing to sink deep, but still drawing blood, Sunny grinned. There was a benefit to having 4 arms after all.
Not so high and mighty now, are you?
The maiden seemed more infuriated than hurt, though. The stone carapace swirled around her, sending the moonlight shard flying away from his hand, and then 2 incandescent fists descended upon him. A spark of flame traveled through the whirlwind of stone shards and licked her body, perfectly cauterizing the wound.
Bad.
The white-haired warrior and Sunny clashed, their speed and ferocity causing more destruction to befall the devastated hall of the temple. Since they were shrouded by a rolling cloud of darkness, no one would have been able to see what was happening under the veil of shadows, noticing only flashes of white radiance that tore through it from time to time. All they would be able to perceive were the furious sounds of a frightening, inhuman battle. The war maiden was faster and stronger than Sunny. Her aspect was fearsome, and her skill was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was different from how humans of the waking world fought, but in no way inferior. In fact, her murderous technique was utterly sublime in its deadly power, stark perfection, and lethal precision. She was also able to control the flow of essence through her body with such an intricate and ingenious measure of control that it made Sunny realize how crude and clumsy his own, which he had been proud of before, really was. His essence was running low, too, because of how much he had spent on delivering the obliterating shot from Morgan's warbow. However, he was not defenseless in that fight. While the war maiden possessed a sublime technique, Sunny possessed a myriad of them. He was able to shift from one style to another effortlessly, dancing like a shapeless shadow, making it difficult to predict and prevent his next move. The cruel sight danced with him, swiftly changing its form from a somber spear to a mirror sword and jumping between his 4 hands. Sunny had dismissed the midnight shard, knowing that it would not be able to withstand the immolating heat of divine flames shrouding his enemy's arms. He relied on his versatility and deception to keep himself alive under the ferocious assault of the monstrous Ascended. And through all of it, he was observing how she moved, how her shadow moved, how they fought, how they reacted. Shadow Dance was slowly absorbing the War Maiden's sublime battle style, thus making her incredible technique more transparent and predictable. The process was helped by the fact that Sunny had recognized the same foundation in it that he had witnessed when Effie attacked him earlier. The two were a master and a pupil, after all. For now, Sunny was locked into a desperate defense, with no hope of launching an effective attack of his own. It seemed as though his death was only a matter of time. But in reality, he was just biding his time, waiting for the right moment to deliver a single but singularly inescapable strike. And soon enough, that moment came. Sunny was battered and beaten, the onyx surface of the mantle of the underworld cracked and glowing orange in several places, as if on the verge of melting. His reserves of essence were almost empty, and his breathing was labored and arduous. One of his horns was broken, or rather cut cleanly. The edges turned glossy and black by the indescribable heart of the War Maiden's fiery palm. But then he suddenly saw it, an opportunity. There was probably not going to be another one of those in this dire fight. As the white-haired warrior raised her hand to deliver another terrible strike, he suddenly turned the blade of the cruel sight slightly, so that it faced the enemy with the flat side. And then, Sunny activated the Light Eater enchantment of the somber spear, turning its blade into a source of bright, radiant sunlight. The War Maiden had used her aspect to adjust her eyes to the darkness, and for that reason, a sudden flash of daylight blinded her, while Sunny remained unaffected by it. He was relying on his shadow sense to move around anyway. His enemy was only blinded for a second, but in the battle at their level, 1 second might as well have been an eternity. Simply losing her sight would not have made the War Maiden defenseless, of course. A warrior like her would have been taught how to fight with her eyes closed. And indeed, she instantly shifted her body and moved her hands, preparing to deflect the most probable attacks. Unfortunately for her, Sunny had already gained enough insight into her style to know exactly what these movements would be, and so he knew how to slip through them. One of his hands suddenly shot forward, the clawed gauntlet shattering a piece of stone protecting the woman's neck. The other followed, passing through the momentary gap in the magical carapace and ripping her throat apart. A strange sound escaped from the War Maiden's lips. Her eyes widened, the white radiance burning in them growing dimmer. For some reason, Sunny felt himself be disturbed by that sight. The whirlwind of stone shards surrounding the maiden's powerful body rained to the ground.
She can't be a shadow.
With that, the fearsome leader of the Red Sect fell to her knees, life draining through the terrible wound on her neck. All it took to kill her was one calculated, treacherous strike. Before the spell spoke, Sunny hesitated for a moment, then leaned down and whispered,
"Find peace within me, this is the mercy of Shadow."
A few moments later, after Sunny spoke, the spell whispered into his ear,
You have slain an ascended human, War Maiden Hilda. Your shadow grows stronger.
He took a step back and grunted, pain and exhaustion permeating his battered body. Sunny muttered, "Why don't I feel happy?" Sunny did not mean to say those words aloud. With a frown, he pulled his gaze away from the corpse of the valiant maiden, briefly glanced at the emerald amulet grasped in one of his hands, and hid it back under the cracked breastplate of the mantle of the underworld. It was not every day that he achieved a victory in a battle against an Ascended. He should have been celebrating. But really, Sunny was not too fond of killing humans, at least those whom he did not hate. Feeling pain travel through his scorched body and observing the sorry state of the mantle, he activated its living stone enchantment and saw the stone-like metal start to restore itself. He also sensed most of his remaining essence flow through the armor, disappearing as it empowered the process. With a sigh, Sunny leaned on the cruel sight and looked around warily. He was not in the best shape, and the battle was not over. It wasn't time to celebrate yet. To his right, Saint was entangled with the red-haired Ascended, their weapons weaving a fearsome pattern of destruction across the remains of the Great Hall. The patient avenger was glowing with an angry orange radiance, and her stone sword was surrounded with flames. Augmented by the cold steel enchantment of the shield, it was somehow resisting the scarlet Odachi. However, the blade of the sword was covered by numerous nicks and cracks, as though it was seconds away from falling apart. The body of the war maiden, meanwhile, was washed in blood but free of any wound, betraying the fact that she had been able to heal all the damage dealt to her by Saint. To his left, Serpent and Nightmare were fighting the two identical Ascendeds. One, surprisingly, was already on the floor, the black steed stomping viciously on her chest with adamantine hooves. The sight of it was both disturbing and frightening, even though Sunny knew that the dreadful horse was on his side. The second maiden was entangled in a furious battle with Soul Serpent, her enchanted spear flashing through the air and leaving deep gashes on the Stygian scales of the giant snake. Despite Serpent's advantage in size and might, the woman was too swift, cunning, and skilled to allow herself to be caught by its coils. What's worse, her weapon seemed to be able to follow the enemy into the shadows, striking at Serpent even when it dove into them to ensnare her. The black-haired warrior was truly terrifying. To be able to resist both an ascended demon and an awakened terror at the same time, even after being damaged by the strike of thunder, and the explosion of the chalice was something only the most fearsome masters of the waking world would have been able to do. If any, however, her luck had run out, because today she met Sunny. Stepping through the shadows, he appeared behind the maiden and struck her in the back, not at all concerned with how cowardly and dishonorable such an attack was. Or would have been considered by some people, rather. Honor was for fools, and while Sunny knew himself to behave like a fool on occasion, he was at least immune to this particular kind of foolishness. The blade of the cruel sight pierced the heart of the brave war maiden and flashed with white incandescence of divine flames for a split second, dealing devastating damage to everything it touched. The woman died instantly, without even realizing who had killed her. At the same time, her second copy finally succumbed to Nightmare's hooves and stopped moving, her body a terrifying mess of torn flesh and broken bones. A moment later, it shimmered with a dark red glow and disappeared. The spell spoke.
You have slain an ascended human war maiden Xavileiro. Your shadow grows stronger.
Sunny muttered that there was one more left, regretting his decision to not let the serpent finish off the ascended, thus replenishing his now empty reserves of essence. Sunny gritted his teeth and turned his head to glance at Saint. However, at that moment, the voice of the spell suddenly resounded once again.
You have slain an ascended human war maiden Kara. Your shadow grows stronger.
What he saw was the war maiden's decapitated body toppling to the floor, the taciturn knight standing above it with a shattered sword in her hand. The length of its stone blade, what remained of it at least, was painted crimson, heavy drops falling down from it. Saint remained motionless for a few moments, then glanced at her broken sword with regret. Her shoulders moved slightly as though the shadow sighed, dropping the shattered blade. She then bent down and nonchalantly picked up the scarlet Odachi that slipped from the Ascended's fingers. Finally, the taciturn demon brandished the Odachi and turned around to look in the direction of the entrance to the Great Hall. Sunny murmured, wondering what she was looking at. Sunny frowned, then suddenly shivered. He exclaimed, "Oh, right, Effie and Kai." He spun, remembering that his friends were currently facing off against a dozen of powerful awakened warriors. However, he didn't have to worry. The war maidens, almost all of them were already dead. Kai was just about to finish off the last one. The young man was clad in beautiful armor forged out of white steel and gold, wielding a swift saber. His battle skill seemed to have improved tremendously since their time on the Forgotten Shore. Those months in the army of the Ivory City must have taught him a lot. Effie was done with her share of enemies as well. The little girl was now wearing a familiar bronze armor, the white chiton beneath it replaced by the red silken tunic of the war maidens. The dusk shard was also there on her hand. However, now the heavy round shield was almost the size of her entire body. Just then, Kai dodged a strike of his opponent, hovered above the floor at an impossible angle. and delivered an unexpected thrust to the war maiden's abdomen. A moment later, Effie slammed into her with the dusk shard. The female warrior fell to the ground, either dead or dying. Suddenly, the devastated hall of the Temple of the Chalice was enveloped in silence. The three of them, Sunny, Kai, and Effie, stared at each other with confused expressions on their faces. It was all over. Have they really won? Surrounded by devastation, Sunny, Kai, and Effie stared at each other with confused expressions on their faces. Their weapons were still raised, ready to strike at the enemies. However, there were no enemies around, just dead silence. Sunny tensely studied the devastated hall, then slowly pulled out the emerald amulet and looked at the little girl with a silent question written on his face.
Effie, tell me, is there perhaps a slumbering saint somewhere in the temple?
She frowned, then shook her head. Sunny was genuinely perplexed.
Maybe there is an indescribable horror that had been contained by the chalice, and we have set it free, or an ancient curse.
The little girl wiped the sweat off her bruised face, then said in her soft, childish voice,
Not that I know of. No, there are no horrors or curses.
Sunny blinked a couple of times. Sunny asked, So what? We really won, just like that? Effie stared at him for a bit, and then yelped in outrage.
What the hell do you mean by just like that? We just wiped out 100 vicious awakened battle zealots, and you yourself killed 3 ascended champions, not to mention destroying the chalice, which was supposed to be indestructible, by the way. Was that not hard enough for you, you crazy demon?
He tilted his head a little and thought about it. Sunny conceded, Well, when you put it like that, I guess it was a bit hard. The three of them, especially Sunny, had indeed achieved something remarkable just now, but it still felt weird. He didn't even lose a single limb, body part, or heart. Well, he did lose half of a horn. That had to count for something, probably. Sunny scowled. That victory had not been easy. In fact, it had been the opposite of that. However, it had not been as costly as he would have expected it to be. 3 ascended were no joke, let alone as fearsome as the war maidens had been. Granted, they had faced him after being mangled by the strike of thunder and the consequent explosion of the chalice, and he had only been able to damage the chalice, thus allowing the divine flame contained within to destroy it, because of his insight into how true sorcery worked. So, in a sense, this victory was the result of those months Sunny had spent barely surviving in the Red Colosseum, as well as his trials and the countless nightmares that gifted him his third shadow. And more than a bit of luck, he sighed, then asked dubiously,
So what, we can just go?
Effie looked around, her gaze lingering on the corpse of the white-haired maiden for a few seconds. Her little face turned somber, and then she simply shrugged.
Unless you want to get roasted even more by the divine flames, I suggest we do.
Kai, who had been silent this whole time, looked around as well. His gaze, however, seemed to be aimed at something beyond the walls of the devastated hall. Then he lowered his head, his eyes turning dark. The young man lingered for a few moments, and then said in a low, hoarse voice,
Are there other children that were being trained in the sect? Do we need to take them with us?
Sunny froze, then scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. Sunny said, Oh yes, I did not think about that. The war maidens were known to take in orphan girls, right? Where are they? He wasn't too happy about the prospect of taking care of a bunch of kids, especially since he had just slaughtered their previous caretakers. But the idea of leaving them here did not sit right with Sunny, whether or not they were just phantasms of the nightmare. Noctis would end up having to deal with settling the children in the sanctuary anyway. Effie's childish face slowly turned still, and she briefly glanced down, in the direction where Kai had been looking a few moments ago. She turned away and said in a strangely even tone,
There were a few other girls with me before, indeed, but they didn't make it.
She dismissed the dusk shard, then bent down to pick up one of the swords laying on the stones.
The war maidens were not bad people, you see, at least not at the start of it all, but somewhere along the way the sect changed. By the time the girl whose body I took over ended up with them, it was as though everyone here had gone insane.
She walked to the next corpse, stared at it with strange darkness in her eyes, and then picked up another weapon.
They were obsessed with the idea of creating a warrior capable of slaying someone called Solvane, so their training, what they called training anyway, had grown vicious, cruel, and inhumanly hard. Of all the girls subjected to it, only a handful survived. In this batch, I was the only one.
Effie sighed, then stopped, staring once again at the body of the white-haired war maiden with a complicated expression.
Strange, isn't it? It was not like they hated us. On the contrary, they seemed to care about their wards a great deal. Didn't stop them from killing us, though.
She remained silent for a bit, and then added,
And despite the fact those girls were being tormented and killed, it didn't stop them from loving their killers. Humans are very weird that way, huh?
The little girl was silent for a few moments, then suddenly smiled.
So yeah, I would like to get out of this place very much. If there is nothing else, let's just go.
Sunny hesitated, then silently motioned to Kai to come closer to Effie. She was putting on a brave face, but he could sense that beneath it, the huntress was deeply disturbed by what had happened to her in this temple and what they had done to the temple themselves. Then he turned around and headed for what remained of the stone chalice. As he got closer, the heat of the divine flame grew almost unbearable. Sunny once again activated the enchantment of the memory of fire and the augmentation of the underworld armament, then moved carefully between the burning shards of stone. In the spot where the chalice had stood before, surrounded by a ring of flames, a simple knife made of a piece of ghostly glass lay, reflecting the furious white light of the fire. Because of the shape and position of the deep fractures that had spread through the cracked floor, it seemed as though the glass blade had been the epicenter of the terrible explosion. There was not a simple blemish on its surface, though. Sunny lingered for a moment, then leaned forward and picked up the glass knife. It was light and cool to the touch, just how he remembered it. Just to make sure, Sunny glanced beneath the surface of the glass blade and froze for a moment, transfixed by the sight of a single string of fate encased within it, looping endlessly on itself. Even if he had not seen that knife in one of his nightmares, he would have instantly recognized it for what it was, the key to an immortal's death, the Ivory Lord's death. He had found it. Outside of the now empty temple of the Chalice, the dawn was slowly painting the world in a beautiful shade of lilac. Sunny was sitting on the ground, staring at a scarlet odachi and a spear with a blade etched with runes that lay on the ground in front of him. Kai had dismissed his armor and was standing nearby, his wooden mask charred and blackened by the heat of the divine flames. His gaze was distant. Effie was also close. She was standing in front of a pile of weapons, some of them whole, some broken and melted by the fire. Despite her exhaustion and injuries, the little girl, whose body was almost entirely covered by bruises and lacerations, was picking up one weapon after another, then thrusting them into the rocky ground with somber determination. The graveyard of swords surrounding the temple was slowly growing, thanks to her efforts. Sunny observed Effie for a while, then sighed. He did not see a lot of sense in leaving so many enchanted weapons behind, even if most of them were only equivalent to awakened memories. However, he was also not going to stop the girl from performing the wasteful ritual, as long as it gave her some closure, or whatever it was she was seeking by performing the strange burial. It gave him food for thought, however. In the future, he knew there was no such graveyard around the ruined temple of the Chalice, which meant that no one had done this last mercy for the war maidens slaughtered in the Great Hall. Was that the reason they had turned into vengeful wraiths? Perhaps. Maybe the swords had just been stolen or destroyed at some point later in time. He had not seen the rest of the graveyard in the future as well, after all. So then, what exactly was the connection between the nightmares and the dream realm? Before, Sunny had been sure that nightmares were simply recreations of the past. Now, however, he was not so certain. After all, the Temple of the Chalice was destroyed in the same exact manner as it had been in the future, which meant that he had always been the one to destroy it. The Seed of Nightmare was a portal to the actual past. Sunny scowled, then shook his head. No, this didn't make any sense. If that was true, then too many things would have been changed in the waking world every time an awakened conquered their nightmare. The connection was too easy to spot. All he had to do was to go and carve his name into one of the menhirs of the sanctuary, then check if it had actually appeared outside the seed. People weren't fools. They would have known by now. Nightmares were almost certainly simply recreations of the past of the dream realm and not the actual thing. However, the coincidence of how the Temple of the Chalice had ended up was too glaring to be natural. Logically, the appearance of awakened from the waking world should have changed the course of events that had happened in the past completely. And yet, it had not. At least not yet. He could think of two explanations for that, one far less frightening than the other. The first explanation was that this was a simple case of his knowledge of the future informing his actions in the past. Sunny had thought of destroying the chalice because he had already seen it destroyed in the future, and so the cycle had been complete without any ominous reasons, just due to a logical connection. The second explanation was far more concerning, at least to Sunny. He knew more about fate than most people. He knew how hard it was to change it, let alone escape its stranglehold completely. So what? What if fate had a pull on all things, had influence over all of existence, and pushed everything, everywhere in a certain direction? To a certain conclusion, no less. If so, the details of what happened could potentially change, but the end would inevitably and inescapably be the same. That was a thought that terrified Sunny beyond belief. He had proclaimed fate to be his sworn enemy after all, and now that enemy seemed more fearsome than ever. With a grim expression, he glanced at Effie one more time, then rose from the ground and walked over to the pile of weapons, picking one of them up and thrusting it into the ground. The girl was breathing heavily, her little body seemingly on the verge of collapse. Nevertheless, she glanced at Sunny with a stubborn expression.
What are you doing?
Sunny picked up another sword and shrugged. Sunny said, "Helping. You must be hungry, are you not? The sooner we are done with this, the sooner you can eat. Everyone wins, no." Effie hesitated for a bit, then turned away and nodded slowly. Together, they continued to bury the swords of the maidens in the rocky soil, with Kai soon joining them. Before too long, the pile of weapons had disappeared, joining the countless swords surrounding the empty, silent temple. Sunny did not know if what they had done was going to change fate, even a little bit, but he hoped ardently that it would. The next morning, the inhabitants of the sanctuary saw a very peculiar thing. A man in a wooden mask and with skin that resembled tree bark effortlessly landed on the soft grass of the island, his tall figure covered by a fitting silk garment. A moment later, a towering four-armed demon climbed from beneath the island and joined him. However, that was not all. There was a scrawny girl of about 11 or 12 years of age sitting on the shoulders of the demon, holding his horns with her little hands and swinging her skinny legs wildly.
G up and faster.
Listening to Effie laugh, Sunny gritted his teeth, then said with irritation,
"Can you stop swinging your legs? I am not a horse, damn it."
The huntress did not listen, so he grabbed her legs with two of his four hands and held them in place, which was not easy to do, considering the little girl's monstrous strength.
Ouchie, my bruises.
Effie made a pitiful face and whimpered. Effie pleaded, "Oh no, please don't hurt me, Uncle Demon. I'll be good, I promise. I'll try to recover from the beatings faster. You don't need to get angry." As the people stared at the girl's terribly bruised body with dark expressions, then looked at Sunny angrily, he hissed,
"I didn't, she's not. You stop it right now, Effie. That is not funny."
The little girl threw her head back and laughed again, then leaned down with a mischievous smile.
Yes, of course, whatever you say, uncle.
After that, she glanced at the tall menhirs of the sanctuary and lingered for a few moments, then whispered quietly into his ear.
So, let me get this straight. Everyone in this nightmare was driven insane by the demon of desire, and to conquer it, we need to set her free, with the help of a mad transcendent sorcerer who wants to defy the gods, start a war against the other 4 chain lords, and kill them. And it was that guy, Noctis, who sent you to the temple of the Chalice. He is the one we are here to see.
Sonny looked forward with a dark expression on his bestial face and then growled. Sonny replied, "More or less. We have a thing or two to discuss with him." He paused for a moment before adding, murderous flames igniting in his eyes. Sonny added, "Because I am pretty sure that Noctis, that rotten bastard, has swindled me again.